Good morning. It is 9:01 a.m., Wednesday, January 10th. I'd like to call this meeting of the Arkansas State Board of Pharmacy to order. We'll start with a roll call. My name is Brian Jolly. I'm current president of the Board of Pharmacy. Dr. Rodney Richmond. Here. Dr. Lynn Krause. Here. Dr. Lenore Newsom. Here. Dr. Debbie Mack. Mr. Harold Simpson. Here. Dr. Beth Ann Davenport. Here. I'd like to note for the record that Dr. Clint Boone, member of the Board of Pharmacy, has recused from this hearing. We do have a quorum. I'll turn it over to Mr. Moulton for the continuation of the hearing.
Thank you, Mr. President. Morning, board members, morning, council. This is the second day of our consolidated hearing. And I believe we left off with Ms. Vales getting ready to call her third witness, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll go ahead and gravitate into that. Ms. Vales?
I'd like to call Dr. John Kirtley.
Dr. Kirtley, would you be so kind as to raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this hearing is going to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you, sir. Please proceed.
All right, Dr. Kirtley, state your job title for the record.
I'm the executive director of the Arkansas State Board of Pharmacy.
How long have you been in that position?
I've been at the board for a little over 19 years. I've been the director for 12 and a half, I believe.
And as part of your duties, do you oversee board's investigations?
Yes, I do.
And you supervise the investigators as well as the attorney position, pretty much everyone in the staff. Is that correct?
Yes, I do have responsibility over that.
All right. And so you're familiar with the complaints that we've received on two of the CVS pharmacy stores, correct?
Yes, I am.
Okay, let's start with the Texarkana store. And I'm going to direct your attention to exhibit number 9 under that tab for the board members. Can you identify for the record what exhibit 9 is?
Exhibit 9 is a complaint that was submitted through our complaint button on the Board of Pharmacy regarding the CVS in Texarkana, Arkansas, regarding a misfilled prescription that I believe was supposed to be filled for Adderall and was misfilled for Focalin for a period of time.
And as part of the investigation in this matter, procedurally, tell the board members what the process is once the board receives one of these complaints.
Most often, if we receive complaints that we simply need a written response to, we will often send to the pharmacy or pharmacist or corporation that is named in the complaint and ask for a written response. When we have things such as serious med errors, such as this, we oftentimes will also indicate that we want one of our inspector investigators to actually either hand deliver the complaint or to start an investigation about how it might have happened, especially when there is an appearance of harm to the patient.
And in the board's estimation, looking at this, did you feel like there was harm to the patient in this case?
Yes, I did. Knowing some of the potential side effects, and there's been a long-term call for even box warnings for Focalin with potential suicide risk. These are Schedule II medications that the methylphenidate salt that was taken, while it is for the same indication as the mixed amphetamine salts, it definitely does have some different side effects that this patient claimed that they had an attempt to commit suicide, which was a striking difference compared to what we often see in complaints.
And was there any, the incident according to this complaint, or I guess when the prescription error took place was June 18th of 2020, correct?
That is correct.
And when was the complaint submitted to the board?
On August 31st of 2020.
And in the complaint, does the complainant explain anything about the delay in why the complaint happened? Did it take her a minute to figure out
Yes,
what had happened with her prescription?
it appeared that the complainant had actually not realized there had been a misfill of her prescription and had taken it for a period of time. After she had attempted suicide and went through a process, she went back and called the pharmacy to see if she was able to get a copy of her prescription on July 8th, roughly a month after she started taking it. And that is when she found out she had actually been receiving the wrong medication.
And is this her reaction? Is that something in the realm of possibility? Is this an exaggeration, or is this contributed? Could this be contributed to her taking this wrong medication?
My reading of this complaint, you can tell that the person is very upset. I believe that it is largely because they feel that this med error led to their decline and their attempted suicide because they were receiving the wrong medication that could have some of those side effects. We oftentimes will see, no matter what the severity of a med error is, that people want us to remove pharmacists from practice or shut down a pharmacy or something along those lines. But most complaints do not include potentially a suicide attempt or hospitalization or anything like that. Those are our extreme cases.
And who is the pharmacist at the end of this investigation that the board was able to determine made this mistake?
I would have to go back and look. I believe it was Dr. Ade. I think so. I'd have to go back and look at the record for that.
Okay, but do you remember, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was Dr. Johnson.
Not in Texarkana.
Not in- No, he can show it.
That sure would.
Okay. Okay, withdraw that. Was there, anything that the board did with regard to the CVS store based on this complaint?
When seeing this complaint, we had started a process where when we were seeing complaints, especially significant complaints, we decided to try to attempt accuracy audits. It was kind of a litmus test or experiment for us after hearing a couple of other states looking at this, knowing that our staff had been told at different meetings how low error rates were. Within the company, it was something where we would expect to see a very low error rate upon an accuracy audit. What we unfortunately found, not just with CVS, but with other pharmacies as well, the information that we were able to obtain from hard copy audits, as well as the number of inaccuracies, were fairly alarming.
And so did the board have discussion with their investigators, and specifically Dr. Fain, about how to conduct the accuracy audit with regard to this CVS store?
We had discussions about doing an accuracy audit. What we found very quickly when we started these is that the information that we're able to see on either back tags or on hard copy prescriptions is not 100% consistent from store to store. The more difficult part that we had in this investigation specifically was we found there were a large number of back tags that were incorrect compared to a follow-up further audit of the electronic system in the pharmacy. We actually found that in these audits, and they are all slightly different in the way that they were handled, that we had, in this instance, a store that appeared to not make corrections to back tags, even if they caught a prescription error and fixed it prior to getting to the patient.
And what's the importance of fixing that back tag?
Well, if you have hard copy records that are incorrect, that is absolutely not a good thing, especially on controlled substances, because the DEA is going to look for those hard copies. Most insurance companies are going to look for those hard copies, and the Board of Pharmacy is going to look at those hard copies. You're basically maintaining and perpetuating an inaccurate record in your pharmacy system. If the power goes out, if you have an inability to access your system at that time, you go and you do pull a hard copy because you can see it by the number on the prescription and try to fill in a manual process, then you're using a record that is incorrect.
All right, and so there's been made a lot of the types of prescriptions that Dr. Fain pulled for this audit, and it's, should she have done controlled substances? Should she have done electronic prescriptions? Do you have any insight on why she pulled what she did? And I guess, is availability of records an issue with regard to the time of it takes to complete the audit?
I object, Your Honor, to leading and lack of foundation and speculation. If I think if she wants to ask, what's Dr. Kirtley's understanding of what Dr. Fain did, I don't think I would have an objection, but just saying, why did Dr. Fain do this, I think goes too far.
And so your objection, Mr. Mitchell, is essentially leading or speculation or a combination
A
thereof?
combination of both.
All right. Ms. Vales, can you respond, please?
I can rephrase. I'm asking Dr. Kirtley if there was any direction from him with regard to what she pulled, or if there's any information he gleaned from Dr. Fain about why she pulled. Is there any discussion regarding that during this time?
Yes, we did have some discussion about what information will be available. We understand very clearly that the easiest thing for us to do is to gather hard copies, just a certain set of them. We did not set out a specific number. Most pharmacies have files that a lot of us would refer to as California files. So if you grab a handful of them, you don't necessarily know how many hard copies are actually in them, even in a number range. For all the electronic prescriptions, some pharmacies will actually print out the electronic prescriptions and add those as a hard copy to those California files. Other pharmacies do not add them to it. A couple of the complexities with these specific cases, I mean, the entire group of them, is when Dr. Fain arrived at that pharmacy and could see how much work appeared to be either backed up or waiting or in queue, or how busy it was not necessarily conducive for us to attempt a full-blown audit of the electronic prescriptions, whereas some of the other pharmacies such as Anderson's had what would appear to be very little backup in their operations and an ability for us to do a more thorough electronic audit. The probably fascinating thing, at least to the staff on this, is we do find errors in electronic prescriptions. Oftentimes the errors that we find, which were cited in the Anderson case, are that in electronic prescriptions, we have errors made in the electronic system that do not necessarily translate well to the pharmacy system. The board would generally, staff, and I believe the board as well, would not generally hold that against a pharmacy if the pharmacy actually dispenses exactly what was input by the prescriber, even if it doesn't necessarily make the best sense. It is a literal direct interpretation and passing on what the prescriber did. So for Texarkana specifically, with the both distance to get to the store and the amount of, I guess, workload that they had, it was not as feasible at that point to really look at doing an electronic prescription audit.
Is that because it would have disrupted the pharmacy and put them potentially further behind if they had to allow Dr. Fain access to all these records?
Yes, that's correct. We did go back, and once we found all the hard copies, we did go back and try to verify those with the electronic system. As I recall, there were a couple that were concerning enough that when we double checked on them, we found out that they had been fixed at some point, but it was not on the hard copy itself. So Dr. Fain went back and looked at all of the prescriptions that we had errors on and tried to verify or validate if they had been fixed electronically, which removed many of those errors originally noted from the report for CVS Texarkana, which were actually still shown in the Andersons just as a statistical number, not necessarily as a charge.
Okay, so let's turn to the Sherwood store. And that file, I'm going to refer to you to exhibit number 8. And can you tell the board members what that document is?
Exhibit number 8 is a complaint received July 13th of 2020. It is from a lady that had a med-air at the Sherwood CVS store. This complaint actually originated with a phone call that I accepted here in the office. And after speaking with this lady, I advised her, here's the full procedure to submit a written complaint with details and explain what our general procedure would be on something like this. When I originally spoke with her before her giving this complaint, she was fairly exasperated and upset. She had taken in a prescription for phentermine to try to assist her with some weight loss that she was working on, both with diet and exercise, but also wanting to do that after discussing with her prescriber. She took dose of that, became very lethargic. Her family thought that she had potentially had a stroke. They had to get her to a hospital. The hospital, in her words, or the way that she explained to me, basically thought that she may have had drug seeking and drug abuse behavior. It put her employment at risk. She has employment where she also has to drive a company car because of her employment. And when she got all the pieces put together and realized that she had been dispensed Ambien, which had a quite opposite effect on her as to what phentermine would have, she began contacting CVS through, as I recall, through the pharmacy and through corporate, and was very frustrated that she could not get information or any assistance in even just paying. She said, I just want my medical bills at least paid in some statement to help show my employer and my family I wasn't abusing drugs. And she became quite frustrated, and someone told her, you should contact the Board of Pharmacy over this.
And she had submitted documentation to CVS, correct? And then I think it says in her complaint that they quit taking her phone calls and emails.
Object to Black Foundation hearsay speculation.
It's here, well, oh, sorry. I'm overstepping.
You want to rephrase, or do you want to?
The exhibit has already been admitted into evidence. I can ask Dr. Kirtley if he would read that section, if that would make the record clear.
I'm going to overrule that objection in terms of a hearsay objection. Go ahead, please proceed.
Okay. Dr. Kirtley, can you highlight for me in this complaint, does she discuss her interaction with CVS with regard to paying for her medical expenses?
Towards the end of this complaint, she says, in any case, I contacted CVS corporate to make them aware and was assigned a risk management person. She was very interested early on, emailing me some forms to complete, asked for bills and medical records. I'm pretty healthy overall and have no history of prescription or substance abuse. Once she received all that, she stopped returning my phone calls and emails. She did ask me to return the pills so that they could try to make it right, but I still have them. I guess in my gut, I thought that if I did, I wouldn't have any proof that she would treat all this like it never happened. It literally infuriates me. I know how the PBMs work and my insurance prefers I use them since they are PBM, but it feels like they are so big that they really don't care about the patients. I have all the documentation from this incident, including pictures of the pills bottle as well as actual bottle. I've spoken with a couple of attorneys whom are acquaintances but have not retained one. I suppose I thought that CVS may do the right thing and offer some restitution, but clearly they do not care.
All right, and based on the board's investigation, a separate investigation from what Dr. Fain did we find the pharmacist that this error could be attributable to?
Yes, we did.
And who was that person?
Was Charles Johnson.
And so then let's go based on this information. Was Dr. Fain instructed to complete an error audit for that store as well?
Yes,
Or an
she-
accuracy audit, sorry.
Yes, she was.
Okay, and tell me, was she given instructions about specifically what to pull as far as records from that Sherwood store?
No, we leave a good bit of that up to our inspectors themselves. I do know that in some of the conversations we've had about audits like this, it's interesting hearing it yesterday that there seems to be some thought process of you should audit the actual specific time when the error happened. I believe that myself and our staff in discussing things like that, you had a problem on, say, Thursday the 12th, but do you know that that was only a problem on that day, or do you look at a slightly different time period that is, approximate to it or near to it or something else? And we basically looked at a nearby time period so that if there had been a problem on a specific day, if someone calls in sick, if there is an issue with whether it's the electricity, the connectivity, the drug supply, or anything else, looking at a nearby time period would actually possibly point to, is this a one-off or is this a systemic issue, to better understand the scope of it.
All right, and you reviewed Dr. Fain's audits. Did you have any concerns about the way she conducted these error audits?
No,
And did you rely on those in making decision about what to do with regard to any board action on this matter?
yes, we did. We reviewed all of the different store audits as they would come up as a group, myself, the inspector investigator, Dr. McCready, and generally legal counsel to discuss through them.
And so let's turn to the comparisons, I suppose, that CVS is making with Anderson's and the other Walgreens stores. You're familiar with those cases as well, correct?
Yes, I am.
And let's just start with Anderson's. You recall what the issue was that brought Anderson's sort of on the radar and in line to do an audit?
As I recall on Anderson's, we also had a med error at Anderson's. I would have to go back and read that full file for the scope of that error.
But Cindy, Dr. Fain was instructed to do an accuracy audit for Anderson's around the same time frame as this all happened sort of all in the same time frame, CVS, and then there was Walgreens and Anderson's, correct?
Yes, the Walgreens actually happened slightly before. They were, as I recall, our first ones that we had tried this, and then Anderson's and CVS hit pretty close to the same time period.
And did you give Dr. Fain any instructions about how to do the accuracy audit for Anderson's?
We talked about conceptually how we would do accuracy audits, and the problem is trying to say in concept, we're going to take a bundle of prescriptions, whatever we think might be an appropriate amount to get through based on volume of the store. We quickly found out that you don't know exactly what all information is contained in that until you're actually trying to digest it.
So with regard to the Anderson's accuracy audit, Dr. Fain was able to pull different records. Is that a fair statement?
I believe the possible better way to put it is that the back tags at Anderson's appeared to have some additional information to look at, such as the recorded origination date of the prescription rather than just the field date of the prescription.
All right. And you relied on Dr. Fain's accuracy audit again with Anderson's in relation to what would happen with regard to Anderson's as far as any board action. Is that correct?
We relied on these audits mainly to determine what types of charges would be possible to charge the pharmacy or pharmacist with, and then we would bring it to the board for them to make whatever decision for action.
So a lot of comparisons been done between the audit of CVS stores and the Anderson stores. Can you sort of identify what the differences are and if you're concerned about any of those differences?
I think that hearing a lot of talk about how they are not the same, that is true. They are not the same. This was not an academic research project. It was not something where the audits were exactly the same or designed to be exactly the same, because they have slightly different information as noted in the output of the investigation. For Anderson's, we included criteria that the board would be able to see and to therefore judge whether it was significant or not. Things such as the patient labels that were exactly as the prescriber wrote, but were probably not truly accurate, even though the prescription was filled as directed. We also had those original written dates entered into the computer were different than what it should have been. Between those two things, it was basically like 47 of the noted errors for that store. It's something that if we had gone back in the electronic system of most pharmacies, we know that that is potentially a common error. Might not have any patient impact other than a patient might get a refill later than they should have if it was available, but it was an inaccuracy that we noted on Anderson's.
All right, and now let's turn to the Walgreens cases. You're familiar with those as well.
Yes.
And through the course of investigating other matters, Dr. Fain was again asked to do accuracy audit for those stores as well, correct?
That is correct.
And can you tell me the difference as far as what Dr. Fain was able to pull from Walgreens compared to what she was able to pull from the CVS stores?
In the Walgreens issues, there were some other slight differences. Most of them were more similar to the actual CVS checks. The bigger differences in the investigation itself was not so much the audit, but it was the quick response of the store and how they made drastic changes to address it even before they had gotten to hearing.
With regard to the Walgreens stores and the Anderson stores, was inadequate staffing ever mentioned as an issue that may have contributed to errors in those stores?
No, the Anderson store, having been in it even myself on previous occasions, they generally have an abundance of staff in that store working at any given time. It is a very busy store. We've worked with Andersons before on trying to give them advice on maybe how to streamline some things or do some things differently that the board has discussed. On the Walgreens stores, as noted during this hearing, that was pre-COVID, and they were probably staffed better than they might have been later, but our investigators nor the staff had any concerns over being at that time overworked and understaffed at any of those three stores.
So with regard to Anderson's, Walgreens, and CVS, you and staff made a decision to bring those three entities in for informal conference, correct?
Yes, we did.
And what is the purpose of an informal conference?
Generally, informal conferences, which were started at the board about the time I came here, are generally a way to have mediation of sorts. If we do not believe that there's going to be an argument over the material facts of a case, generally it's an opportunity for whomever is before the board and a select group of board members, however many happen to be at that meeting, to have a general conversation back and forth across the table to see if they can come up with some sort of agreement. I know we call them informal conferences, informal hearings, or different things, but we don't have a full administrative process in that. We generally discuss the issues, and at some point we explain. At the end of this discussion, the board will generally come with some sort of suggested action. The most important thing for you being in front of the board is that you could either agree or disagree with that action. If you agree with it, the staff will go forth with whatever the board has suggested. We will reduce it to writing if need be and present that back to you. If you disagree, then it's your chance when you have a case like this to then basically request a hearing from scratch from the board. It's a different stab where you have the full board in place. We have a hearing officer, court reporter. We swear all the witnesses in, and it goes through the Administrative Procedure Act process. I would equate it to oftentimes in a criminal side, not being an attorney, but understanding some of it, it would be similar to having a mediation towards a plea arrangement or consent agreement to see if all parties agree. If they don't, we proceed to a hearing where that basically is out the window and we start over from the beginning.
And so again, Anderson's, Walgreens, and CVS were all given that same opportunity to come in from an informal conference, correct?
Yes, they were.
Now, is it a fair statement to say that offer is not made to everyone that the board investigates?
That is a fair statement.
So it's possible that depending on the gravity of the situation, you might not offer informal conference as a route to handle a matter.
Yes, we do have cases where we can either believe that there will be arguments about the material facts of the case, or that there would not be the opportunity to reach an agreement. Or that we've even had cases where we were fairly sure that the informal conference would not want to have a portion of the board make a decision and would prefer to see a formal hearing, expecting that it may very well go forth for challenge.
Okay, so let's back up to what happens before you get to informal conference. When Dr. Fain goes in and does her accuracy audits, does she communicate that back to staff at the pharmacy?
Not during the audit generally, unless there is something significant found. If we find a med error during an accuracy audit that looks like it could be harmful to patients, we would generally check and see if that had been identified or corrected, if the medication might still be in the patient's possession to take. If it's something that it's 4 weeks old and the patient should have finished it 3 weeks ago, it's fairly difficult to fix it at that point. What's done has already been done.
Did the board staff have any communication? Or tell me what the board staff's communication was with regard to Anderson's when they realized the type of errors that the board had identified.
I know that even before we had identified the errors, I had at least I believe one phone call. I know our staff talked to the owner at Anderson's when she realized that there was an accuracy audit going on, and I believe even looked at some of that information herself. She immediately started retraining staff and taking significant measures to correct that. It's fascinating if you look at our record. Oftentimes when someone appears before an informal, such as Anderson's, the letter from our legal counsel is basically accepting that this is the plan, but it's because the board has accepted the plan that has already been implemented and put in place as an official record. So we probably could have done a better job of saying we recognize the work you've already done versus you are going to do this. These are things that had already been implemented by Amy at Anderson's and shown to be successful.
And you were present at the informal for Anderson's, and there's a transcript in CVS's exhibits, but that's basically what that informal was, would you say? Her coming in and listing off all the things that she had done to rectify the errors.
Yes, she began taking action, I believe, the same day that we had records on their way back to Little Rock.
And do you recall committee members commending her for taking that initiative during that informal hearing?
Yes, I do. I seem to recall that there were committee members that were quite impressed that we had a one-off pharmacy without a corporate back structure able to try to answer something and make corrective action at that level that quickly.
Okay, and then let's talk about Walgreens. What was the board staff's interaction with regard to Walgreens after they discovered that we had found some errors, significant errors?
So my recollection, especially with the Walgreens here in the Little Rock area, when it was identified that many of the errors were with one staff member, which was a little bit different than all of our different investigations, Walgreens actually took immediate action. They reassigned that staff member, restructured their staff, put another pharmacist in charge to go through a complete retraining of that staff, where they were doing their own internal audits, overlooks, and checks back to see if corrective action was taken. It was something that we had not seen anywhere else, actually, for the Walgreens, that we estimated they probably spent a very significant amount of money completely changing that staff over and completely retraining that staff for corrective action.
And so at the board's direction, was another audit completed with regard to Walgreens after their appearance?
Yes, it was.
And what was your understanding of why that was done or requested?
That was requested due to the fact of trying to see if there were positive changes from the corrective action that was taken.
And did the board have communication staff have communication with CVS with Walgreens management with regard to the changes? Do you have an ongoing relationship with some of those people that serve in that capacity for Walgreens?
Yes, we have fairly frequent communication at both the state district level as well as the national level, higher up within Walgreens, and discuss some of these changes and how it was going several times.
And have those conversations continued after this? Do you have conversations with Walgreens if they ever check in and say, is there anything you're seeing on your end or anything like that?
Yes, we actually have fairly frequent contact with their district manager and with their overall regional manager about any concerns we have with the company. It's something that if we have a problem with Walgreens, we can generally either pick up the phone, talk to a regional person, talk to their local district manager, or have direct contact with the store itself and their pharmacist.
And that's not isolated to Walgreens, correct? You have those types of relationships with other chain pharmacies, hospitals, other kinds of pharmacist entities. I mean, in your opinion, or do you feel like we're available to those entities as a resource if needed?
I believe that the Arkansas State Board of Pharmacy staff are the most accessible Board of Pharmacy staff in the country. We do not have an automated phone system. We have humans that answer the phone. Most of our pharmacy people that we deal with, if they ever ask for our contact information, not only will they have our office number, they generally are welcome to have our cell phone numbers. We are very active in our pharmacist Q&A closed Facebook group to help answer regulatory questions or for people to reach out to us.
Do you feel like you have that kind of relationship with CVS?
Not at the same level.
And after doing the audits of the 3 CVS stores, tell me how you and staff determined that staffing contributed to these errors and misbranded drugs.
Trying to define appropriate staffing, as we've already heard in this hearing, is very difficult. It's, to me, very similar to trying to define the word tacky. And it's one of those things where sometimes you say it's not tacky, sometimes you say it might be, and other times everybody in the room would agree. I think in these cases, when we saw the amount of workload based on the number of people, as well as different complaints we were having about backup at these stores, wait times, and the amount of work that was just obviously either waiting on the shelf, waiting for return, or in queue, it appeared to all of us that we believe staffing had contributed. Inadequate staffing could either be the number of people or the ability of the people present to do the amount of work that's demanded on them. Staffing could be that you need more people. Staffing could be you need different people.
And so in conjunction with Dr. Fain and for Daniel, who is the previous board counsel, did you make a decision on what to charge CVS with after the informal process, I guess, didn't work out? There was no agreement reached.
At that time, we decided to carry forward with the original order notice type of charges that we had originally put in. Having been here for many years, we generally will charge pharmacies or people with, 1792-311. That's what we cite. In this one, I think there was an issue potentially with the A sub 1 that is specific to person, but if you look further in the document, it's being held under the 1792-300 chapter of the statute, which is quite purposeful on our part.
And that's present in the board members' law books there on the tablet to review, but 1792-311A, what does that part of the statute cover?
So 1792-300, while generally being about pharmacists, if you get down to 1792-311A, in our law book, it is on page 36 of the overall document, or 24 is the page number. It actually goes through the Arkansas State Board of Pharmacy may revoke or suspend existing certificate of licensure, license, registration, or permit, or may refuse to issue a certificate of licensure, license, registration, or permit if the holder, applicant, as the case may be, has committed or is found guilty by the board of any of the following acts or offenses set forth.
And in that section, it refers to permit. What is the definition of permit? Who is permitted with the Board of Pharmacy?
Generally, we refer to permits as business permits, whereas we generally would refer to individuals as either having a license or a registration. They are all printed upon a permit. But for pharmacists, we would generally say license. For interns, we would say license. For pharmacy technicians, we would generally say registration. For everyone else, we would call it a business permit.
And tell me why the decision was made to charge CVS under that chapter.
The issue is if we charge a pharmacy under chapter 300 of 1792, it has a subsection 1792-315 that allows for alternative penalties where the board is not forced to revoke a permit. If we only charge a pharmacy under 1792-407, which is also cited for the reason we're having this hearing, and the board has any finding under 1792-407, the board has no choice but to revoke that pharmacy permit and for it to be done so immediately. We did not believe in general that the board is trying to revoke the permit of these pharmacies. But if we charge it that way, the board has no choice if they have any finding but to revoke that permit immediately.
So that choice was made for that reason, to give the board members a little bit more leeway as far as what to do if they chose to go disciplinary route on this.
That is correct.
Do you feel like what was presented and what is in the order of notice of hearing constitutes violations of that chapter?
Yes, I do.
1792-311.
Yes, I do.
Objection, ultimate issue. Object, he's testifying as the ultimate issue.
He's already answered, but it does call for a legal conclusion. I would sustain it, but he's already answered the question.
Can we ask that the board disregard his answer?
Sure. Would you be so kind as to disregard the answer? Because board members, it's up to you to decide whether or not the law was violated or not.
Well, I can rephrase it a little bit. That's not exactly what I was trying to do, but you would not instruct your attorney to charge anyone with something that you didn't feel we were proven up with the facts. Is that a fair statement?
That is correct.
So in charging that, you felt the board had enough evidence to make that charge?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And then again, as you already testified, we didn't go under 407 solely, although it is an option in the order of notice of hearing, and that was a deliberate decision as well, correct?
Yes, it is.
Do you have anything else with regard to CVS stores, Anderson's, or Walgreens that you feel like we have not gone over that the board needs to know about?
I would add that in our investigation of CVS, we did face some difficulty in trying to contact their stores. It appears that somehow whenever we try to call these stores from our office phones, our numbers seem to be blocked or unable to complete calls to their pharmacies. So whenever we do try to call them, we basically have to do it from either cellular telephones or another site somewhere else. It's something we've never faced before and we can't figure out.
And what about when the issue of staffing came up, did the board attorney make any efforts to sort of determine, I guess, if the staffing issue was legitimate or not?
We actually decided at one point to attempt something we thought would be helpful for CVS, and that was we requested staffing information for all of the CVS stores in the state of Arkansas for a time period. We hoped that it would show that the time periods that we felt like there were med errors or potential staffing issues may have been outliers compared to other stores. When we submitted that subpoena, it was only answered for the 3 stores for these cases, and the data for the other stores in CVS was refused to the Board of Pharmacy, saying that we did not have, as I recall, saying we did not have authority to ask for that type of information unless we had a case on a pharmacy. That put us in a position to where we could either pursue court action to enforce the subpoena, or we could start cases on every subpoena, or excuse me, cases on every CVS in the state of Arkansas in order to force the fact that we had a case and therefore we're investigating it. At that time, we decided to walk away from it. We thought that might help show that there were not the same type of staffing issues per volume in other stores, but we let it go.
But based on the responses you received for the 3 CVS stores were at issue today, did that change your mind about the staffing or adequacy of their staffing?
It did not.
All right. And just for the record, we're charged, the CVS stores, the informal conference took care of the errors made by the individual pharmacists and the 2 med errors that we received complaints for that you've discussed today.
All of the pharmacists did reach an agreement with the informal conference and completed that.
So every course of action that the board requested, the informal committee requested, has been completed by those pharmacists.
That is correct.
All right, anything else on these? Anything else that you want to present that we have not talked about?
No, ma'am.
I'll pass the witness.
Board members, Mr. Mitchell, if you would be so kind as to indulge me, I'm jumping ahead, but apparently I consumed way too much coffee this morning. So can we take a 5-minute break?
I did the same, so let's do it.
back on the record. I'm not certain who's doing cross. Mr. Mitchell,
Yes, sir. Thank you.
please proceed.
Good morning, Dr. Kirtley. I'd like to start just by asking you a little bit of some background type questions. Specifically, just sort of about your role and the division of duties with the Board of Pharmacy. I don't know if I'm speaking into this well enough. How could you describe how your role compares to Dr. McCrady's role specifically? And to be maybe a little bit more precise, I believe when Dr. Fain testified yesterday, she said that she primarily reported to Dr. McCrady. So I'd just be interested to hear how her duties compare to your duties, particularly with respect to investigations and disciplinary proceedings.
Sure, and I'm fairly familiar. When I started with the board in 2004, I was the assistant director originally. When I became the director, I brought Dr. McCrady in to be the assistant director. If you look at the specific hierarchy of the board and our supervision, for me, I supervise Dr. McCrady. Dr. McCrady is in many ways the chief operating officer, for lack of a better term, the assistant director of the Board of Pharmacy. She has direct authority over our legal counsel, our CFO, and the three pharmacy inspector investigators. So she is the immediate supervisor of Dr. Fain and the other investigator inspectors.
So would it be fair to assume then if Dr. Fain is going to conduct an investigation or an inspection, that she would come back and immediately report to Dr. McCrady, and then it would make it to you as appropriate up the chain?
I can see how that would look like it. In general, many times when we have cases, we all get together to discuss them. Instead of playing the telephone game of an inspector tells Dr. McCrady something and Dr. McCrady tells me something, most oftentimes we set out throughout the week where many times we all sit down together to discuss it.
After an issue arises, either through a complaint or an inspection, who participates in the decision-making process on whether the board staff should move forward or take any action with respect to, whatever issue there may be?
In general, we would have the inspector investigator, Dr. McCrady, myself, and legal counsel involved in those.
And is that the group you just described that would ultimately make a decision of whether to bring an issue to the board?
It is probably generally ultimately my decision on whether or not something comes before the board. We usually get the group together to discuss the overall facts of the case, what evidence we have, what types of charges we would file, and then it's generally up to the director to determine exactly what goes on the agenda for appearance.
Do you consult with the board president or other board members about, does the board want to hear this case or that case?
No.
So there's no discussion between yourself and the board about cases?
No, we do not discuss cases with the board, not even the board president, until they are before the board. Because they could be contested matters, we would generally consider that to be ex parte communication. We do have discussions with the board president, such as scheduling or dates or overall concepts that may be coming before the board just as a preparatory issue, but nothing about cases that would have potential discipline.
And as the executive director, do you have the opportunity to participate or facilitate rulemaking or regulatory changes with respect to the regulations of the Board of Pharmacy?
For the rule side, yes, we generally do.
And on the regulatory side, is that something that you would have the opportunity, and I understand there's a legislative process with that, but you would have the opportunity to ask for changes from the legislature or appropriate persons? And is that something that, in your view, sort of falls within the purview of your role?
Generally, it's something that we would look for opinion of the board if they are directing for that, but yes.
Do you regularly testify at disciplinary hearings?
Yes, I do.
Do you ever yourself personally go out and conduct inspections of pharmacies?
Not generally inspections. I have at times been involved in investigations.
And with respect to at least the 3 CVS stores here, that was, I think we heard Dr. Fain was the one that went out and conducted those inspections. Is that right?
That is correct.
What about accuracy audits? Have you ever, do you ever yourself conduct an accuracy audit, or is that also something that the inspector would do?
Generally, the inspector will do that. I've done second looks at that, but I've not been the primary investigator on those.
So then is it safe to say that you are relying on information from the inspector, in this case, Dr. Fain, about what is found, at least in terms of a physical inspection when she goes out?
Yes, sir.
And so we heard from her yesterday about her inspections and her views on it. And I think you just testified in your direct examination about workload and being behind and other types of observations. And I just want to make clear that your comments are based on, that's not based on your own personal observations. That's based on what Dr. Fain went and inspected.
Yes, I did not have firsthand eyes on scene there.
All right. Ms. Viles talked to you about complaints on 2 CVS stores, patient complaints. And let's start with Texarkana, as I think she did. But I think it was your testimony that there was a patient complaint that prompted an investigation or inspection for the Texarkana store. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And we looked at the patient complaint that was submitted to the board, and it was dated August 31st. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And I think in that complaint, the patient said that they themselves discovered the error on July 8th, 2020. Is that right?
Yes.
We turn to Exhibit 24, and it is in the CVS stores binders, not the board binders. And actually, I'm going to start with Exhibit 25. Go to 25, please, sir. Okay. Exhibit 25 is a summary of inspection, and Dr. Fain told us about these types of reports yesterday. And just to paraphrase, I think it was her testimony that these are sort of work report summaries that she would prepare for Dr. McCready, so she knew what was going on. Is that right?
That is my understanding as well.
And we have an entry here for June 22nd, 2020 in Texarkana. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
And that's CVS 10019.
Yes.
And in this June 22nd, 2020 entry, the last sentence there says, due to complaint, we subpoenaed original prescriptions to conduct an accuracy audit. Is that right?
Yes.
All right, but didn't you just testify that the complaint was received on August 31st, 2020?
Yes.
And June 22nd, 2020 was, of course, a couple months before August 31st, 2020.
Yes, sir.
So then looking at this, does that refresh your recollection or give you reason to want to change your testimony about whether this inspection and the subpoena to pull prescriptions in Texarkana was prompted by an August 31st, 2020 complaint?
That is my recollection. I don't know the exact date of when this report was submitted to Dr. McCready.
But on the report, it states it's a report for her inspections from June 22nd, 2020 to June 24th, 2020, right?
Yes.
And now will you flip to Exhibit 39? Exhibit 39 is the first page, at least. That is the front and back is the inspection report that was completed by Dr. Fain on June 22nd, 2020, when she visited the pharmacy. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And Dr. Fain testified about this inspection, and you were here all day yesterday. You heard that testimony. Is that right?
Yes, I did.
Isn't it true Dr. Fain testified at first that she went down there just to pull prescriptions, that she was not conducting an inspection, it was just to pull prescriptions? Was that her initial testimony? Do you recall?
I believe that's correct.
And then when I showed her this document, I think it refreshed her recollection that she actually did at least complete an inspection report, but she clarified that she was just in and out of the store, grabbed the prescriptions, left, but she did complete a report. Is that a fair summary of her testimony, to your recollection?
That is my understanding as well.
And if we look at this report, there's not anything on here about staffing or the store being behind or anything along those lines, is there?
There's not.
Will you look at Exhibit 24, please? Dr. Kirtley, Exhibit 24, I think is Dr. Fain explained, is the report she prepared after she had been able to pull the prescriptions and conduct the accuracy audits. Is that your understanding?
Yes, it is.
And just to be clear that we're not talking about two different accuracy audits here. This is, she says here in the first sentence that this was an inspection that occurred on June 22nd, 2020. Is that right?
That is correct.
And then in the third paragraph, she pulled or reviewed for accuracy prescriptions from May 10th, 2020 to June 3rd, 2020. Is that right?
That is correct.
But Dr. Kirtley, you have to agree with me then that there's no way an August 31st, 2020 complaint prompted an inspection and retrieval of prescriptions and an accuracy audit on June 22nd, 2020. Would you agree with that? That there's no way that could have caused that?
I would agree with that. I cannot recall. Let me read this real quick. I did not think that June 22nd was the day that she pulled the records, but I would have to review our records to see that. But otherwise, yes, I agree with you.
Now, Ms. Viles asked you some questions about some differences amongst the types of prescriptions that were pulled in the accuracy audits that were conducted compared, between Walgreens, CVS, and Anderson's. Do you recall her asking you those questions?
Yes, I do.
And you testified, I think, that for Texarkana, only paper prescriptions were filled because of the workload that they were experiencing, and that the board staff didn't want to put that store farther behind. Is that right?
That is my recollection.
But isn't it true Dr. Fain testified that she walked in the store, grabbed those prescriptions, and walked right out?
Yes, the day that she got them.
And she didn't testify about any other time in this time frame where she had been to Texarkana and observed the store being busy or being behind, did she?
Not that I'm aware of.
And again, you have no firsthand knowledge of that. You're relying on Dr. Fain to give your testimony about what your opinion of the workload was like in that store. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And with respect to the August 31st error or August 31st patient complaint, the board did end up issuing a fine to the individual pharmacist in the amount of $1,000 for that error. Is that right?
That's my recollection, yes.
And ordered additional continuing ed, I think, for all the pharmacists.
For everyone involved.
Okay. Now I want to turn to Sherwood. I think you testified that there was also a complaint in Sherwood. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And that pertained to Dr. Charles Johnson?
Yes, it did.
And you testified that based on the complaint, that it appeared that the patient was frustrated about a lack of response by CVS to that error. Is that right?
That's what she told me, yes.
think that was exhibit 9 in the board's binder. Let's pull that up if you will. I tried to touch this and instead of letting my more adept colleague do it, and I've messed it up. So bear with us just 1 second, sorry. Eight. I think I hit back one too many times. Yes. For sure would. Yes, sir. What I'm trying to find is the oh, thanks. No, it's exhibit 8. I'm sorry. It is the complaint from the patient. Sorry for that confusion. Okay. All right. Sorry again for that confusion. So exhibit 8, this complaint that was submitted by the patient for Sherwood, it was submitted on July 13th, 2020, right?
Yes, sir.
And there's nothing here in this exhibit or in any other document we've seen today about what happened after July 13th, 2020. Is there? In terms of communications or any communications between CVS and this patient?
No, there's not.
So at least as of July 13th, the patient was frustrated with the response, but we don't know if in August or September or later, at least we don't have any documents about what may have transpired after that.
I do not.
And CVS is not charged today with not paying this patient's medical bills, are they?
No, sir.
I want to clarify one thing about Dr. Johnson. I think there maybe was some confusion about him and his termination from CVS. But first, is it your understanding that Dr. Johnson was terminated by CVS?
Yes, and I probably know where you're going, that his termination was based on failure to report the med error to CVS, not because he made an error. And I would probably fully agree with you that that was not explained correctly in that. So his termination was not because of the fact that he made an error. It was because he did not make the technical movement to report that error once it was known correctly in the CVS system. And Dr. Johnson was very clear on that himself, even with the board.
Thank you, Dr. Kirtley. That was just, I thought it was confusing on that yesterday, so I wanted to make sure we had that clear. All right, and then I think you testified that for Anderson's that there was a med error or a complaint that also prompted the inspection and the accuracy audit for that store. Is that right?
That's my recollection.
Will you look at exhibit 1 in our binder? Isn't it true, Dr. Kirtley, that Anderson's was before this board just a year before these 2020 issues? They were before the board in 2019, weren't they?
Yes, they were.
And the board, as we see on exhibit 1, ended up assessing a $500 investigative cost against Anderson's and Dr. Candace Gibbons, right?
That's correct.
And that was a separate issue from whatever error was reported or complaint was received in 2020. Is that right?
I believe so.
Ms. Viles asked you some questions about Anderson's and Walgreens and CVS's respective reactions to notification of the accuracy audit and the errors. Do you recall Ms. Files asking you those questions?
Yes, I do.
And I think you testified that Walgreens, that you were impressed with their response to it, that they quickly took action. Is that right? And you felt that CVS did not do so. Is that right?
That is correct.
Now, at Walgreens' first informal hearing, there was no testimony about any remedial measures or additional training or that sort of thing that had happened before the first informal, was there?
I'd have to go back and look. I don't recall that.
I would represent to you that it was my understanding that at the first informal, the board specifically told Walgreens there were some things they wanted to see in terms of improvements, and they wanted to have the right people come back for another Walgreens hearing so that could be explained to the board and what Walgreens had done to make improvements. Does that sound, I know I'm paraphrasing or summarizing, but does that sound about right?
I would accept it, but once again, I'd have to go back and view that hearing.
And with respect to Anderson's, you stated that that you have observed that Anderson's has an abundance of staff, or you don't think staffing is an issue there. Is that right?
I do not.
Okay, but Anderson's did have a high error rate, at least as shown in that accuracy audit, correct?
Yes,
Oh, is it your view that as long as there are a lot of bodies there, that a high error rate is more acceptable?
not at all.
All right, and with respect to CVS, CVS did present testimony at its informal hearing, the one and only informal hearing, about steps it had taken to try to address the errors, didn't they?
Yes,
And specifically, it was Dr. Roe Sadrigas, and I'm butchering his last name, but I'm just going to call him Roe. I think that's what he likes to be called. I will represent if we can do that. We turn to Exhibit 60 in your binder. And I'll ask you to turn to page 25 of Exhibit 60. Really on 25, I just want to orient you that we're looking at testimony from here. It's shown as Mr. Rowe. Okay. And there are, he testified for quite a while, and I'm not going to go through all of it, but we flip 2 pages later. On page 27, and look down to starting on line 13. And here, Rowe testifies that, so when I look at the specific examples that we've been talking about here, as I was doing my research, I noticed about half of these opportunities were incomplete directions, particularly if there was a SIG, that's a PRN, that it was missing the piece after, whether it be for pain or some sort of indication, et cetera, et cetera. And seeing that consistency across numerous stores, I realized that kind of opportunity most likely for some training, and training in the sense that it wasn't unique to a specific individual or specific store, but that we had the responsibility to go back and make sure we align the rest of our team around those expectations. That was a portion of his testimony at the informal hearing. Is that right?
that is.
Okay, now will you turn to page 33? And again, this is all Dr. Rowe's testimony, but I just want to highlight a few portions of it. At the top of 33, line 1, Dr. Rowe testified, once I did that, once I visited the 3 stores, I realized that we have a statewide approach to address a lot of these things. So the first thing that I did was I held multiple live conference calls that every single one of our pharmacists had to hop on these calls so that to discuss the topics. Essentially, I'm saying to understand that we are seeing opportunities around, for example, complete SIGs and the need to complete SIGs, and how we have to really prioritize the safety and compliance expert in our business. Now I'm going to skip down a few lines to line 18. It says the next thing is we use the hub portal, which I mentioned previously, where we sent out basically an exercise around driving dispensing accuracy, where it provided a lot of examples for specific prescriptions And then the pharmacist needed to work with the pharmacy team to run through the exercise to again establish what does good look like. Let's make sure we know how to do it the right way first, and then let's move forward. And then we track completion of those hub tasks to make sure that every single one of our teams completed it. Now, he testified for quite a while about him personally coming in, visiting these stores, and these tasks that every pharmacist was required to complete. Does looking at that refresh your recollection of some of the steps CVS took before even its first informal hearing?
Yes.
Has the board conducted inspections of these 3 CVS stores following these 2020 inspections that give rise to the complaints here?
I'm sure we have.
And there's not been any, at least, strike that. There's not been any major issues that have been identified since then, have there?
I'd have to pull up the inspections, but none that have called us to proceed towards hearing or anything.
My understanding is that there was, on occasion, a team roster needed to be updated or that type of thing, but nothing in terms of a serious med error that needed to come before the board. Does that sound right?
I believe so. And I would add that I think all these stores have maintained like Class A status with their inspections. With their actions, with their inspections.
We turn to Exhibit 17, please, Dr. Kirtley. Just to orient us to time, is it your recollection that the informal conference with Walgreens occurred on April 6, 2021, the second informal conference?
Yes.
So Exhibit 17, if you look down the first page, it's an email chain between you and Matt Gilmore with Brenda McCready and Luke Daniel copied. And I'm specifically, looking at an email you sent on Wednesday, April 14th, 2021. Is that right?
That's correct.
So that's about a week after Walgreens informal conference where they testified about all the things they were doing, right?
That's correct.
I want to look at starting at the second paragraph here. In your email, you state, I am also not surprised that Walgreens neglected to mention the cases they have had as recent with the Arkansas State Board of Pharmacy or other states where the overall accuracy of prescription filling has been a major issue. When we checked 3 stores for a finite period of time, we found inaccuracy rates of 7% to 17% when we audited a block of prescriptions. This is a problem, a major problem that is being addressed in various ways. Going down the same paragraph, you then state many pharmacists from this company will only talk to us off the record for fear of retaliation by their employer after watching some of their practices and letting pharmacists go. But even with a corporation pushing for increases in tech ratios, none of them asked for that. Did I read that correctly, Dr. Kirtley?
Yes, you did.
Skipping down to the next paragraph, it says, overall, I fear the data we would see if we took a further look at a large cohort of their stores. We may find more of the same on both the inaccuracy audit and the lack of staffing to approved ratios. When asked multiple times, multiple ways, Walgreens refused to tell the board any specific details as to their required metrics for pharmacists to accomplish or their overall error rates, although they did appear to admit that they only have their own self-reported data and have not done an accuracy audit similar to the Board of Pharmacy. Did I read that portion correctly for the record?
Yes, sir.
And then skipping down a couple lines after the tech hour listing here, you state, during our informal conference hearings, Walgreens would not disclose their approach to determine staffing levels of pharmacists and technicians despite multiple questions from the board asking for this information. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
But Dr. Kirtley, on direct examination, I think you testified that one of the differences that in your view justified the treatment of CVS compared to the treatment of Walgreens was how forthcoming Walgreens was at the informal conference in terms of sharing information on the one hand, while CVS apparently was very difficult, didn't provide any plans and did not share information. Was that your testimony with Ms. Files?
In part, yes.
But here, just a week later, it appears that your opinion was that Walgreens was not forthcoming and did not share information. Isn't that right?
On a different issue, yes.
Well, you're actually referring to the informal conference that actually in this email, aren't you?
Yes, about tech ratio metrics specifically.
And you're actually in this email talking about questions asked at that informal conference of Walgreens and your opinions of their reactions, right?
Yes.
Now, with respect to the Sherwood store, Dr. Fain also testified that similar to Texarkana, she went in, pulled prescriptions and left. She didn't stick around and observe the store. Is that right?
I believe so.
And isn't it also correct that in Sherwood, the errors that were identified, the vast majority, I think 27 compared to 3, if my memory is correct, were all attributable to one pharmacist. Is that right?
That sounds correct as well.
And that was Dr. Johnson who had the med error, who was then terminated.
Yes.
But not because of the med error. I
Yeah,
don't want to.
he worked the majority of the hours in that store, was, as I recall.
Dr. Kirtley, does the board have a recusal policy in terms of board members recusing if they may have some sort of interest or influence in the outcome?
Generally, I believe the entire state has a general recusal policy. I don't know that we have a specific written one.
Okay, so it's just a general, when we feel like we should do it or understate. I'm just wondering, I guess my question, let me strike that and try to do a better job asking you the question. Is there some specific document for the Board of Pharmacy about when a board member should recuse from a proceeding or not?
Not from the Board of Pharmacy. I believe the Attorney General's office has a board member packet that helps go through some of that for board members appointed by the governor.
And I guess we saw that with, as was noted by Dr. Jolly in the opening, that Dr. Boone recused today or from these proceedings because I've represented some of his businesses and have a personal relationship with Dr. Boone. Is
Yes.
that right? Now, isn't it true though, Dr. Kirtley, that Dr. Newsom presided over the Walgreens informal conferences?
I believe so.
And Dr. Newsom was an employee of Walgreens at that time. Isn't that correct?
I don't remember if she was at that time or not.
I think Dr. Fain testified that the first time the board did an accuracy audit was late 2019, early 2020. And I think it was, I guess to maybe be more specific, it was that Walgreens audit. Was that the first accuracy audit?
Of this type, yes.
And what was the, I guess, the genesis or the reason to start doing accuracy audits that hadn't been done in the past?
For me, the thought process was we had been told previously by different companies what their accuracy rates were, what their error rate was. I mean, we'd had discussions with CVS, our call specifically with those, and looking at some other boards. I know the state of Oklahoma went forth and did an accuracy audit to actually look at errors, and it, for lack of a better descriptor, kind of blew their hair back because many of us as regulators have been told this is the number to have confidence in. Here's how we'll even make it better if we expand tech ratios or things like that. And then when they did it, it was very concerning that the data we had been told previously might not be accurate. And so at that point, we said, well, we've never done this. We can try it and see what we find. And we were, I think, equally as shocked when we looked at it.
We've talked about in these proceedings, accuracy audits conducted with Anderson's, a few Walgreens stores and the 3 CVS stores. Other than those accuracy audits, has the board the board inspectors or the board staff conducted any other accuracy audits?
We, as I recall, did a couple with Walmart, and there may be another one. I'd have to go back and look. We've done accuracy audits of just on-site spot checking that we don't know. It's not an official process, just to eyeball some stuff. But as far as like these in-depth ones, those are the only other ones I can think of.
And you're right about Walmart, and I think that was even mentioned yesterday, and I just forgot about it there. So I think there was one for Walmart that was in this same time period. Has the board ever issued a fine for every error identified in an accuracy audit?
Yes.
And when did it do that?
Well, so I can back up. The board has offered that as a negotiated agreement. This is the first set of cases the board has had at a contested hearing over an accuracy audit. So it will be somewhat precedent setting on however the board decides or proceeds with it.
Sure. And when the board has offered that in the past, has that occurred other than with these 3 CVS stores?
Not on this type of accuracy audit.
Has the board ever charged a pharmacy with misbranding drugs due to errors found in an accuracy audit other than this proceeding, of course?
I believe we had order notices modeled for the others that would include that, but I would have to check our records.
But at least in terms of getting to a full board hearing, like we're doing here, this is the first time.
Well, yes, I mean, the problem with trying to go back and say, have they done it as part of an accuracy audit? This is the first case they've ever had of this type to this level.
You talked with Ms. Vale some about back tags, and I think the importance of back tags so that, there's a record if someone comes in later and needs to see what happened. Do you recall that testimony?
I do.
Now, Dr. Fain testified yesterday, and I think this was only with respect to the re-audit of Walgreens, but that she testified that Walgreens didn't have to have or was not required to have back tags for non-controlled substances. And so that's why she didn't include them. Did you hear her testimony on that?
I did.
And is that true that Walgreens is excused from having back tags?
It was something I did not remember initially, but I seem to remember that they did have a presentation and request before the board a few years back about maintaining the record electronically instead of having to do back tags. And I believe it was approved as requested.
Do you know why Dr. Fain was able to review back tags and conduct an accuracy audit of the Walgreens store at the end of 2019, but then was unable to review back tags in 2020 of the non-controlleds?
I'm not sure.
Has the board ever, other than these cases, cited a pharmacy or brought charges against a pharmacy based on an allegation of inadequate staffing?
Not that I'm aware of, except in instances where there was the absence of a pharmacist, which would be deemed inadequate staffing because you do have to have a pharmacist.
And I think we've gone over this with several witnesses, so I'll try to just cut to the chase, but there's no specific statute or regulation in Arkansas that establishes a staffing requirement for pharmacies, is there?
Well, there are specific statutes that require staffing of a pharmacist. There is no specific statute that requires how many per volume of work or anything else. That, to my understanding, does not exist anywhere in the country. Other than we do have it in our hospital rules where it describes what sufficient staff for a hospital operation would be.
Dr. Kirtley, are you aware that CVS issued written discovery requests to the board regarding the allegations in this matter?
I believe so.
And the board staff did not respond to those discovery requests, did they?
No, because my understanding is discovery isn't part of the Administrative Procedures Act. You go through the FOIA process and get the same information.
I will pass the witness.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Mills, do you have any redirect?
I do. Dr. Kirtley, with regard to the complaints that we receive through our website usually, I think in earlier testimony, you testified that you actually talked to one of the complainants in this case, correct?
That is correct.
Is it possible that Dr. McCready also talked to the other complainant?
Objection calls for speculation.
A response?
I'll rephrase. So if you get a complaint, if someone calls the board and asks to speak to you and they have a complaint, is it within the scope of regular business practices for staff to go ahead and act on that? Or does staff wait until we have that complaint through the process on our website?
That generally depends on the scope of the complaint. We have, in most instances, the board receives a phone call where people will describe what's going on and we will explain to them how to officially file a complaint. There are times when we would have information that would be shocking enough that regardless of a written complaint or someone's inability to actually submit a written complaint, we would go ahead and start acting on it. Many times, we will have information that we explain to people. There's nothing that the Board of Pharmacy has authority to do over that issue, and people may not even file it.
Have there been times when investigators have been out on the field and you've called them and changed their day and tell them, go check on this, go check on that, based on some phone call or information that you immediately received that day?
Yes, many times.
So let's go back to the testimony that Mr. Mitchell went over with the informal. And you, in that process, were able to ask questions of any of the people providing statements. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that's normal practice in these informal conferences. Is that a fair statement?
In the informals, yes, it is.
And so during the informal, would you characterize some of the questions by board members and staff as trying to get to what the issues were with CVS that may have contributed to the errors?
Yes, we were also trying to ask metrics questions of CVS during that.
And that's where I was going. Didn't you bring up with regard to, he's identified in the transcript here as Mr. Rowe, did you ask him about metrics?
Yes, as I recall, there was at some point, and I can't remember the order, a statement that the metrics had been cut in half during that time due to some of the COVID, but we couldn't get any specifics of either how staffing metrics were determined or if they exist or what other metrics there were on the pharmacies at hand.
So you're characterizing his statement as he said he cut them in half. You don't know what he cut.
We do not.
Okay. And let me direct your attention to Board Exhibit 60. And that is a transcript.
CBS
I'm
Exhibit
sorry, CVS Exhibit 60. That's a transcript of Rose's testimony. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And if you'll read down on line 11, halfway through that, it says, I'm a bit.
What page are we on? I'm sorry.
We're on page 49, I'm sorry.
Okay.
It says, I'm a business support partner for all these teams, but I'm not sleeping, breathing the actual inaudible every day. What do you characterize as that? What was your interpretation of that testimony?
My interpretation was that this is someone who's not in the stores on a consistent basis. When we were having some of these discussions, even internally, during this process, to staff, at least myself, there's a major difference in someone who is seeing exactly what's going on in a store on a day-to-day basis or in real time, being able to see how many cars there are in the drive-through, how many baskets are on the counter, how many are in the queue. You could see how many are in the queue. You could see what the overall volume is, but you can't tell that the lights aren't working or the refrigerator is broken or there's something wrong with the drive-through or how many people are standing in front of you.
And so when you walked away from that informal, did you feel like CVS had given you enough information for you to be satisfied that they recognized that there was a problem and they were doing specific things to address it?
I guess I felt like they recognized there might be a global problem and were trying to address it from a global overall higher up level down with some education. But to me, that was quite different than having a firsthand look in person of what specific changes in a specific store might need to be done.
And I think Rose's testimony was, we've had phone calls where every pharmacist has to listen in. And we have had some sort of portal. Were those satisfactory to you that they were on top of these issues?
Not to me.
And of course, you're not a decision maker, I guess, when it comes to the informal process and what the board does. Is that a fair statement?
That is fair.
Okay.
I'm not a decision maker on the outcome of a case. I'm a
Right.
decision maker on whether or not it comes before the board.
Do you recall, and I believe, let's go up to page 42 of Exhibit 60. And that again is the testimony of Mr. Rowe. Can you just read for me lines 1 through, let's go with 4 there.
It starts with pharmacist dash, and I'm not speaking specifically to these stores, but we have pharmacists who take on workload that could be delegated or could be trained. I understand that we have a lot of flu shots.
So was it based on Rose's testimony there, did you feel like he was not saying staffing was an issue? It was that the pharmacists weren't delegating workload?
That is the way I took his comments in that instance. And that is a somewhat common theme that you will hear other people talk about. There are many things that pharmacists could assign to someone else that at times they prefer to do themselves or continue to do themselves.
And you were present yesterday for the testimony of Dr. Smith, correct?
Yes, I was.
And she's an overnight pharmacist at the Texarkana store during this period of time, correct?
She was.
And based on your observation of her testimony, was there anybody for Dr. Karina Smith to delegate her workload to?
No, she was very clear when we spoke with her and in her testimony that she was by herself, that there was no one to delegate anything else to.
And is it fair to say there's a lot of things that pharmacists do that cannot be delegated to, let's say, a technician?
Absolutely.
What are some of those things?
So any type of intake of verbal orders that are made to the pharmacy have to be taken by a pharmacist. A pharmacist has to do a final check of anything that was input or any duties that were performed by technician or by, technology. The pharmacist is also fully responsible for doing the DUR med checks to see if there are any types of drug interactions. And the pharmacist are responsible for patient counseling on all new prescriptions or any questions that patients have on refills.
But is it fair to say there are some things that technicians, I mean, that is their role, is to assist the pharmacist, correct?
Yes,
And the board in the past has addressed this with regard to pharmacy to technician ratios. Is that correct?
well, the pharmacy to technician ratios for the states that have them, at least for Arkansas, the way I've seen the board approach that is the maximum number of helpers or assistants that a pharmacist could supervise to delegate duties to at any given time,
And is that an issue that this board has looked at?
many times.
And let me refer you to Exhibit 8 under the board staff's files under the Bella Vista folder. You identify for the board members what Exhibit 8 is.
This is a letter from CVS Health from 2015 in support of changing our technician ratio. At the time, it was a 2-to-1 ratio to a 3-to-1 ratio. States that CVS Health believes that allowing pharmacists opportunity to utilize 3 technicians will enhance patient safety and provide pharmacists more availability to discuss the needs of their patients.
And during the time of these investigations of the CVS stores, what was the tech ratio allowed?
Well, for pharmacies in Arkansas, it was 3-to-1 during this investigation.
So CVS could have 3 pharmacy technicians for every 1 pharmacist that they had, correct?
Yes,
Based on the investigations and the audits that we received as a part of the subpoena, was CVS taking advantage of that full ratios?
they were not.
Okay. And then and I think the testimony was yesterday that, and there's turnover in technicians' positions as well, but the testimony, if you've heard it from Dr. Smith, was they were cutting technician hours. Is that your understanding of her testimony yesterday?
Yes, it is.
And this is all during a time of COVID or before COVID, when pharmacists were basically sort of on the front lines of battling this COVID crisis. Is that a fair statement?
That is fair.
And let me turn your attention under the same folder, Exhibit number 9. Can you identify for the board what that is?
Exhibit number 9 is a very similar letter sent on behalf of the National Association of Chain Drug Stores in 2015 with identical language on behalf of the NACDS stores that increasing the tech ratio would enhance patient safety.
Okay, thank you. And let's go back to CVS Exhibit 17, which is your email exchange between you and Matt Gilmore. Can you identify for the record who Matt Gilmore is?
Yes, Matt Gilmore is my supervisor within the Arkansas Department of Health.
And do you regularly report to him or answer his questions about any goings on at the board?
Yes, I do.
And that would be part of your job responsibilities as executive director?
Yes, it would.
And anything you want to clear up with regard to what the subject matter was with Exhibit 17?
So in this email exchange, I can tell you that, first of all, I was not surprised that this was a request that went directly to the governor, because there is I feel like a breakdown in communication many times with the lobbying, regulatory, or government affairs side of companies and the lobbyists that they use and the actual people within those corporations here locally. I think that's true for most of our different chains. You're not necessarily having the same conversations with the lobbyists taking those actions as you would the pharmacy personnel. In this exchange, I wasn't surprised at all that that would have gone directly to the governor rather than through the Board of Pharmacy, because we've had other attempts to change ratio by statute or through governor's action. It was fascinating. I was trying to help, my supervisor understand they're probably not talking about the fact that they already have had the ability to have 3 techs, and yet they are not even utilizing that fully at this time. My understanding is that talking to other executive directors, this was a push around the country, no matter what the ratio was, that some companies were pursuing either governor's actions, emergency actions, or other things to expand ratio at that time. When we reviewed within our office, we found that hardly any stores were actively using a 3-to-1 ratio at that time, whether they were having errors or investigations or not.
And even by CVS's own admission in the letter they sent to you, technician ratios 3-to-1 would improve patient safety. Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement.
Anything else that you want to clear up with regard to your testimony?
Well, I think along the lines of tech ratios, if you look at the inspections as well as the different feedback forms that Dr. Fain had gathered from pharmacists, I think that there was frustration for some of us, at least within the office, that there seemed to be a lack of taking advantage of the staffing that you could have after we were told that having that staffing would increase patient safety, and after we were told that error rates were very, very low, which is just not what we found.
So that brings up another question I have, and then I'll continue, but the decisions made as far as charging CVS with what it is, it's not solely a staffing issue. We're not alleging necessarily that that's the only, and
Objection leading.
sorry, are we alleging that that's the only reason that these errors occurred?
No, I believe that's charge number 14 on one of them. Is the last allegation in most of the allegations for all 3. Overall, they're here because of the volume of errors and the type of errors that we had. If you reduce this hearing to nothing more than just saying it was on errors, you could completely ignore staffing as being one of the many points of why it happened. The fact is, we're not arguing over whether or not the errors happened. We might be arguing over the reason behind them. It appears there's a great deal of sensitivity about it potentially being staffing, but staffing is not the make or break line of why we would have even had this case.
Anything else then?
I don't believe so.
Thank you. Pass the witness.
Mitchell?
Yes, thank you. Dr. Curley, I want to try to clarify some of this about the tech ratio and these letters, and then your emails. So you showed us a letter from 2015, excuse me, by Mr. Al Carter, the Senior Director of Pharmacy Regulatory Affairs at CVS. Is that right?
That is?
And at that time, was the ratio less than 3-to-1?
Yes, it was 2-to-1 at that time.
Okay. And you know who Al Carter is?
I do.
Who is Al Carter now? What position does Al Carter have now?
He is the CEO of the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy at this time.
All right, so that's 2015. Now fast forward to 2021, and I'm going to look back at Exhibit 17. And apparently this discussion came up again. You were saying it wasn't with you, but it was with the governor's office about increasing tech ratios. Is that right?
That is.
But if you look at Exhibit 17, says, I'm looking at page 3 of Exhibit 17, it says, and Matt Gilmore's email to you telling you what the question, it says, this is Walgreens asking. Is that what it says?
Yes.
So in 2021, we don't see anything here about CVS asking to increase tech ratios beyond 3-to-1, do we?
No.
And then your response to that is all about Walgreens error rates and other things that you felt like Mr. Gilmore needed to know about so he could understand this request.
From Walgreens, yes.
Yeah. And I just want to make perfectly clear This doesn't have anything to do with CVS in 2021.
No, it's not our exhibit.
All right, you testified that at the informal hearing, although you weren't the decision maker, it was your view that you weren't convinced and the board wasn't convinced that CVS was on top of things. Is that right?
That is correct.
Now, there's one way we could have empirically figured out if they actually were making improvements, isn't there?
I probably know what you're talking about, but I mean, if we had done another audit or been instructed to, that could have shown a difference.
And so we can quibble about what Dr. Rose said, but the fact is a re-audit was never conducted. So we don't have any data to see if CVS, if what Roe was talking about here actually helped improve things, do we?
No.
Walgreens, that is what happened, right? There was a second audit so they could see so the board and the board staff could see if things actually improved, right?
The board directed staff to do a second audit.
And that second audit that was conducted at 5730 for Walgreens, the error rate was still 9%, right?
I'd have to pull it and see which exhibit.
Exhibit 49 in the CVS stores binders.
Yes,
And to be specific, it was 9.4%.
yes, that was 21 of the 224.
And those were only controlled prescriptions, right?
At that time, yes.
And the controlled prescriptions in the first audit, you recall they were 12% error rate,
That sounds familiar.
and the non-controlleds were 24% error rate, right?
Yes,
Now, you also just said that we're not here because of staffing. We're here because of volume of errors and types of errors. I wrote that down when you said it. But isn't it true, Dr. Kirtley, that if we're talking about volumes of errors and types of errors, that CVS issues were well short of what the board saw with Walgreens?
yes, given that the audits were different.
Well, the audits were actually more favorable for Walgreens, weren't they?
Not necessarily.
Well, Walgreens, the non-controlled prescriptions had a 24% error rate, right?
Yes,
They were both just paper only, so that was the same.
yes. Well,
And-
actually, that's not correct. Because with CVS, although it was paper, the electronic was checked to see if the paper had been corrected. And that was not done, or I don't recall there being a statistic analysis on that with Walgreens because we discovered that later in the process.
And then, and the controlled substance error rate was 12% for CVS, right? Excuse me, for Walgreens, right?
I believe so.
And then when it was re-audited, the controlled substance rate went from 12% to 9%, the controlled substance error rate.
Yes,
And the CVS 3 stores, just on the very first audit, their error rates were 5.5%, 5.5%, and 8.2%, correct?
yes.
I'll pass the witness.
Any other follow-up?
Just one, Dr. Kirtley, at the close of CVS's informal hearings, had the board members instructed board staff to re-audit for accuracy those CVS stores? They would have done it, correct?
Yes, we would.
And we were not requested to do so, and therefore it was not done. Is that a fair statement?
That is correct.
That's all I have.
Mitchell?
Nothing further.
Board members, any questions?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so again, I am the new kid here, so I'm catching up on some of these things, but you mentioned that staffing could include number of employees, training of employees, and qualification of employees, correct? It's not just number.
I believe it's not just a number, it's also what is the ability of the staff. I mean,
Right.
I think most of us would understand that as pharmacists or technicians or interns, we all have different talents in different ways.
Sure.
We all have the person that's really good at writing. We have the person that's really good at proofreading. We have the person that's really good at talking.
Okay, and so then, but that qualifies as like the employer responsibility, right? Like that would be,
I believe
Okay.
so.
okay. And then, so the questions that I have just around like a lot of the talk with Walgreens and Andersons, et cetera, are, so one, because this is the regulatory body, right? Please correct me at any point if I'm wrong. So can an audit be conducted just randomly, or does it have to have cause?
We could do an audit at random. In fact, I had had a couple of conversations at one point with a person higher up in CVS that was quite frustrated that we weren't just going out and doing random audits versus for calls. We had a nice discussion about the fact that we were only doing audits for calls, especially with the data we're seeing. I think it opened our eyes to the fact that there are a large number of inaccuracies that may not be patient affecting for many pharmacies that we need to talk about.
Yeah, so with all the talk of timing and all of that stuff, really, we could go out tomorrow, an inspector could go out tomorrow and re-audit and do the same, go through the same process just because it's a good time to do it or something.
Absolutely.
Okay. Is there anything within the decision made at the informal hearing that was outside the scope of the Board of Pharmacy in any way?
I don't believe so. I think that the issue we've had in hearings many years ago were if you clarify the overall authority of the board, and I'll separate this into formal hearings versus informal hearings. I try to explain this, especially at the beginning of informal hearings, which you'll see when we have applicants, especially technician applicants. The board could suggest one of many actions, which could be anything from approval of an application to denial of an application. If it's someone who has a license, the range of decisions could be, we find all this and basically have no punishment or findings or dismiss the case, the go forth and sin no more approach, to revocation, which is the two bookends of the extremes. In between, if it's a formal hearing, there's statutory language that gives approval for the board to fine up to $1,000 per violation. And that's kind of the end of the book for that if you are fining. The board also has the authority to recoup investigative costs. The board has the authority to put someone on probation for a period of time with some sort of requirements within that probation as well. So there are several decision-making things. One of the things that is different with the informal conference is we have at times had people come in and say, we would have reached an agreement with someone that might be beyond what the statutory authority would be for the single instance of a med error, for instance. I have seen a med error case that the agreement that was reached with informal, as I recall, was something like $50,000, but it wasn't just a single med error. It was I hate to say a comedy, it's more of a tragedy of multiple issues that could have been multiple violations that most likely would have resulted in revocation, in my opinion. And instead there was an agreement hashed out for that. So the informal conference, much like mediation, much like a plea deal for a criminal act, doesn't necessarily have to completely adhere to what the statutory limitations are on a formal hearing versus an informal hearing. It is also in many instances cleaner with informal because, as I said before, if we only charge with 1792-407 and the board finds that there is credibility in that and finds it, it puts the board in a position where your only decision is to revoke a permit, revoke a license, close a store, take someone out of practice. And sometimes the board doesn't want to do that, or the staff isn't even thinking that that would be the option. So we try to find a different way to charge that is a kinder, softer approach.
Okay, and is there anything in the statutes or laws or regulations that requires like consideration of what's happened to other pharmacies in the decision-making process, or is that just left up to the professional judgment of the board?
Well, it's the difficulty that I see, and this is more of a thing for the attorneys. The difficulty is boards try to be consistent in actions. And the 19 years I've been here, it's very difficult to be completely consistent in all actions because every case has areas of nuance that are much different. The example I would give is you could have three people that are in the criminal side convicted as murderers, but the way they committed the crime, everything else is not just that it was a murder, it was the level of violence, the level of planning, the level of response or whatever else. You could have three completely different outcomes, even though the overall result is there was a body in all three instances. So you do strive for consistency, but because of differences in cases, that's very difficult. We do have some things that are very set forth that the board is very rigid of. A PIC violation is a PIC violation for failure to notify. It's a flat thing that we've done many, many times over. CE violations, which are a very direct, you're short this many hours, you get this type of monetary penalty, you get this type of makeup of CE, and they are very consistent, but other cases are a one-off.
And
Your Honor, and I'm sorry, I
go
didn't mean
ahead.
to
No,
interrupt you
go
there,
ahead.
Dr. Davenport. I know I think this is productive. I don't have an objection to these questions. I did want to, to the extent we're sort of having a little bit of a sidebar here with respect to talking about the regs or the rules here.
I don't know about a sidebar, Mr. Mitchell, the board's asking him to witness questions. I wouldn't call it a sidebar. Now, you know that based on the questions that are going to be asked, you always have a chance to do some follow-up questioning of yourself. Now, is there something else that you wanted to add beyond that? Or
I had a question about, or a comment, maybe it's a question to Your Honor, or I could ask Dr. Kirtley about the provisions regarding disparate treatment under the Administrative Procedures Act, which governs this.
well, why don't you
I'll
hold
hold
that
back
for the
and wait.
time being, because there may be some other questions that come out that you're going to want to ask some follow-up as well. Dr. Davenport, are you still in the middle of your questions, ma'am?
well, so I just wanted to make sure that I understand that there were significant nuances discussed in the informal hearing. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes,
That it would be difficult to quantify?
I believe so.
Okay. And then I think that, okay, so was it communicated or through, I guess, that the board decision was solely based on error rate? Or was that just part of the,
I don't believe it was solely on that.
okay. All right. Those were my, well, and this is a little bit different, but did Anderson's or Walgreens have patient complaints that resulted in patient harm?
I know they had patient complaints. I would have to go and review the file to see if they resulted in harm.
Thank you so much.
I had the same question, if we could try to get that clarified about the harm piece. Walgreens, the prompt to do a accuracy audit was a patient complaint.
As I recall, they were,
Okay.
all three of those were also patient complaints.
So Dr. Curley, in an informal or in a formal, who are the decision makers in those settings?
It's completely the board that are the jury, the decision makers.
And we've seen exhibits with emails and text messages and things like that. Do the board members have access to that information either prior to, during, or after any type of decision?
Not prior to, unless someone sent them an email. Not during, unless we provide that as part of an exhibit. I mean, our practice and our caution generally when we talk to board members is we do everything we can to avoid any type of ex parte communication. I mean, we've had discussions with our board members for years that, one of the things you have to watch, if you're a board member, and I think I've had this discussion with probably half you guys, I have far less ability to talk about issues with a board member than I would a lay member of the public. Generally, we could have a lay member of the public file a FOIA request for the same information, just like CBS does to get their information. Our board members don't do that because they know it could contaminate or give some sort of predisposition or bias prior to a case, which would be inappropriate. So I've never had a board member file a FOIA or ask. I've had board members before say, hey, somebody is trying to call me about such and such issue. And I'll say, well, my advice, I think our legal counsel's advice would be, because I can tell you that is an issue that will come before the board later. If you discuss it with them now, you won't be able to sit at the board and do that.
Would it be a fair statement to say, regardless of whether it's a formal or an informal, that board members do not know the context of anything until the day that we show up for the meeting and we have our tablets here? Would that be a fair statement?
That is a fair statement. We have had a couple of instances in the past where working with opposing counsel or something where we knew there would be a great amount of information that would have to be digested. I only recall this for informal meetings, and we have gotten clearance to share a PowerPoint or some piece of information so that board members could look at it beforehand. One of the great frustrations of, I think, both staff, people in front of the board and the board is there are times in hearings where we give you, there's, I don't know, a foot of documents, quite literally, if you print it all out in this, and it's difficult to digest as a board member.
To the best of your knowledge, with regards to the informal with CVS, did any of us receive any information prior to that, or did we only know about that case and the specifics of it the day that we showed up for the informal to have the hearing?
As far as I'm aware, there was nothing known about it before the actual hearing. I mean, there might be knowledge that there are cases coming up and Walgreens or CVS might be there, but no specifics.
In as far as the chair of an informal or the president of a formal, in general, is that individual involved in any voting?
Generally not. In our informal conference, gosh, I've watched it for 19 years. I've seen the chair of the informal vote maybe once or twice when there had been a tie. And I can't think of more than that. Generally, they are there working similar to how a hearing officer would in a formal proceeding to basically make sure that the flow of the meeting is going correctly, officially requesting if there are board members that have questions, comments, and calling for votes and basically tallying them.
To the best of your recollection, on the day that the informal with CVS occurred, did Dr. Newsom have a vote of yay or nay in that decision?
I don't recall that she did.
Okay,
I thought she was asking for the vote.
that's my recollection as well.
I think that was consistent with Anderson's and with Walgreens. Generally, for informal conferences, Dr. Newsom has chaired that committee for many, many years.
Correct. Last question I had is just a point of order. Have I been mispronouncing your last name? Is it Vales or Viles?
Fails.
Thank you.
Vales.
Could I?
I've done the same. I'm sorry.
Every time you do, my brain has to autocorrect to.
Say it one more
Vales,
time.
So,
Fails.
Fails.
okay, thank you.
I'm sorry.
I'm glad the president asked that question because I had the same one kicking around in my head.
I had a note to ask Ashley yesterday and I forgot. I'm
Any
sorry.
other board members? Questions for Director Kirtley? All right. No other questions from the board at this point. Follow up from council, Mr. Mitchell.
Nothing further.
All right.
Nothing
Ms.
further.
Vales.
Nothing further.
You see, I did pronounce it
Got it
correctly.
right.
All right, may this witness be excused? Of course, he's not going anywhere. He
Yeah.
basically owns the building, so.
I'd like to keep him subject to recall.
Mr. Mitchell, do you need a 5 or 10 minute recess to gather yourself, or are you ready to proceed?
I think we're ready to proceed.
All right.
If the board
Well,
is, or is there?
well, hold on a second. Before I do that, let me ask, Ms. Vales, do you rest?
Yes, we rest subject to recall,
level.
yes.
All right. Mr. Chairman? All right, board, if you're ready to proceed, Mr. Mitchell's ready to proceed, we can move on. Mr. Mitchell, go ahead and call your second witness. The first witness came in out of order yesterday because of a scheduling issue.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. I would like to call Dr. Ashley Ellis.
Would you be
Seated to my
so
right here.
kind as to raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm the testimony about to give in this hearing is going to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Yep, you're gonna have to pull that up a little bit closer. The court reporter is saying she cannot hear you.
Okay, better,
You might-
better,
You might even have to yell at,
better.
yeah. Mr. Mitchell?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, I guess still this morning. Dr. Ellis, could you just introduce yourself to the board, please?
My name's Ashley Ellis. I am also an Arkansas licensed pharmacist. I
That's
Okay,
good. That's
okay.
perfect. Will you just tell us a little bit about your educational
Yeah.
background, really just sort of higher education, Dr. Ellis?
Sure. So I went to undergrad at UCA, and I went to pharmacy school here at UAMS. I graduated in 2016.
And what did you do after you graduated pharmacy school?
So I started as an intern with Target in 2013. And so upon graduation, I took an offer with Target in CVS inside Target. And then I was a floating pharmacist in the Central Arkansas area for about six to 7 months. And then I got a staff position in Conway, which is in my hometown. I'm from Greenbrier, so I jumped on that opportunity real quick. I became the pharmacy manager at that location about a year later. I stayed the pharmacy manager there for about 5 years. And then I recently took the position with CVS. I accepted the position as a district manager. We call it district leader in 2023. Yeah. So I was live as the district manager as of March of 2023.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis. And starting in January 2023, did you start training to be the district leader?
Yes, that's right. I accepted the position in January, and then I had about 3 months of training before we even announced it to the team. And then I had another couple of months of training from another DL in Houston that helped me due to the state and being able to work through those opportunities.
What is your geographic region, Dr. Ellis, is the district leader?
So I have most of the state of Arkansas. I have 15 stores in Arkansas. That includes Central, Northwest, Northeast. I also have 9 stores in Missouri. So Springfield, Branson, West Plains, and Joplin, Missouri.
And I guess specific to the stores that are before the board today, do you have the Bella Vista and Sherwood stores?
I do now have Bella Vista and Sherwood, yes.
Could you tell the board just a little bit about what it means to be a district leader at CVS? What are your responsibilities? What are the types of things you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so I support the pharmacy managers in my stores. I also help them with development. I am their leader or manager. They're all my direct reports. So all of those duties you can imagine of a district manager all fall under my hat.
And could you tell the board a little bit about any programs or software, that type of thing that CVS employs to help it promote safe and high functioning pharmacies?
Yeah. So this year, the first thing that pops to mind this year, we have implemented Smart DUR or Smart DUR as the company calls it. And so it is it's a system to slow down the pharmacist, and it pulls the we all have hard stops in all of the systems, but this system is a little bit more sophisticated in that you cannot just bypass it. You can't just say pharmacist approved. You have to document the conversations that you have with the prescriber or with the patient, and they have to be pretty specific. So it also gives the pharmacist some next steps on what recommendations based on the literature that's that they have integrated into our system that you should make. We also, you may continue.
Yeah, keep going if you want
Okay,
to.
okay. So we also have workflow proficiencies and workflow programs. We call that We Care. In 2022, I helped with the We Care relaunch in the state. So I actually had the opportunity to come out of my store and then go to the other stores and help them identify some and root cause some of these, where we had some disruptions in workflow or training opportunities, that sort of thing, and kind of work through whose primary and secondary responsibility each things were to try to help them have a better understanding of what our workflow should look like.
And when you did that, Dr. Ellis, were you going all over the state on the relaunch of that or the launch of the We Care?
Yeah, so in 2022, the district that I was in had Central Arkansas, Northeast Arkansas, but it also included Targets, where at this time I don't have the Target locations. So it's just a different layout.
And then I've also heard about something referred to as OPI. Could you tell us what that is?
OPI is our way of measuring how the pharmacy is doing from a regulatory standpoint. So it measures things like we have a pharmacy manager regulatory review. So making sure that they've completed that each month. That gives them a list of things to go through. It switches out each quarter. There's 4 different regulatory reviews. And so they get a different one every month. And so that makes it a repeat quarter to quarter. But we have an internal auditor that will come in and audit similar things to that regulatory review. So that lets us know, for one, if they completed it in the system, then we know. But then the auditor comes through and makes sure that it wasn't just hit yes or no, that they were able to complete that with integrity. So it also measures inventory functions. So it lets us know, are we completing returns? Are we doing cycle counts? It's really important, of course, always to do cycle counts. But in our system, what's a little different is we don't do a lot of the ordering ourselves. They can order something, they can add things to order, but our system is very automated. And so if your cycle counts need to be updated in order to get an accurate order in the next day or the weekly warehouse order. It also measures scheduling. We term that My Team Care, which is like your scheduling and staffing measure. So My Team Care measures things like your scheduled fitness, adherence. Scheduled fitness means, are we scheduling to the right peak hours? Like, do we have enough people in when historically those have been busier times? Then it also measures adherence. So are we making the schedule? Are you providing it to your colleagues 3 weeks out, and making an accurate schedule for them? They also have the opportunity to advertise shifts so that technicians around the area can pick up those shifts if they like.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis. Now, you were here all day yesterday, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And we saw some pictures, heard some testimony from Dr. Smith, who was the overnight pharmacist in Texarkana yesterday. And in particular, she showed us pictures of some baskets that looked like they were either on the floor or on the counter. I wanted to ask you if you could comment on sort of what that is, where that fits in the workflow, and sort of your observations about those pictures.
Object to that testimony. I'm not sure it's been established that she's ever even walked in that Texarkana store during the time period in question.
Oh, what's your response, Mr. Mitchell?
That the CVS has, and I'm happy to have her lay this foundation, but the same types of workflows between these different stores in terms of where baskets are, that sort of thing. I think we also saw pictures from the Bella Vista store about baskets. We're really talking about all the same type of thing in terms of workflow, which is what my question is really about, is what is the workflow? What are these baskets doing and where does that fall in the process? I think she has the experience.
I had no overall objection, primarily because she sat here for Dr. Smith's testimony and heard it, and she's seen the photographs. And so I think she can voice some sort of opinion on what she heard and what she's seen, regardless of the fact of whether she's ever been in the store or not. Please proceed.
So I also managed a 24-hour store during that same time period with similar volume. And the baskets to me looked like that those were ready fills, which is essentially our auto fills. So those drop down with a future date. And typically your black baskets are not your urgent prescriptions. We differentiate those by color. Your black baskets are supposed to be the ready fills or things that are not due urgently. Also the ones in the baskets that were in the floor, and then also I believe the ones, if I recall correctly, the ones on the counter at Bella Vista looked like those were visual verification or QV2. So they've gone through your DOR initiating. Then the technician has counted it, labeled it. Our system will scan both the label and the bottle. So at this point, the pharmacist is, of course, verifying what's on the label and that the right medication is in the right bottle. But it's all, our system will also notify that pharmacist if even if they've eventually scanned the correct bottle, if they ever scanned something incorrectly on that particular prescription, it's going to come up and say bypassed. So it's going to also alert the pharmacist. In my experience in the 24-hour store, if we ever were in a situation where we were feeling behind, then or that we might be leaving something for the overnight pharmacist, then we would try to get as much out of counting and QV1 as possible and leave the QV2 for them so that they are primarily doing verification duties as a pharmacist.
So is having then, to make sure I'm understanding you correctly, and I'm not a pharmacist, of course, but I think you testified it was visual verification remaining, and what the workflow at least is supposed to be is that is actually getting ahead for the overnight pharmacist, so their workload is less. Is that a fair characterization of your testimony?
I don't know necessarily that it's less or more. It's just more of a professional courtesy that rather than having them, like we talked about yesterday, do all the counting and do catch up multiple queues, that we're trying to make sure that what they are establishing are the pharmacist duties and trying to make sure that they're doing primarily that. If there is anything to catch up, technically you should have the daytime prescriptions completed at 8 p.m. If those were ready fills that had dropped the night before and flowed over into the next day, then a lot of times too, the technician might count those and stack those up. So because technically those should have been completed on the night shift the night prior.
For a ready fill, you said it's something I guess for the future. So does that mean it's due the next morning, or how far out are ready fills being prepped?
Yeah, at that time it was due 3 days later.
Dr. Smith also testified that at least it was her understanding that there was a CVS policy that prohibited her from opening a stapled prescription bag and checking it. Is there any such CVS policy to your knowledge?
No.
I know you testified you came into your position, started training in January, fully in March, but will you just tell the board about how things are going in Bella Vista and Sherwood now, your stores, how things are going, where you are on staffing, and that sort of thing?
Okay. So in Bella Vista, we are staffed we need 2 part-time technicians and a full-time technician. I do have 2 licensed colleagues that work in the front store. And while Bella Vista is working on hiring from the store manager and the pharmacy manager partnering together to bring folks on, they do have 2 part-time in the hiring process, and they do have an interview Thursday for someone. Now they've needed the part-time, but as far as that full-time opening, that opened this week. So they should have that resolved in the next few weeks. In the meantime, the front store colleagues will be helping fill those gaps, and they are licensed and have been licensed, and they've worked back there before. I also,
How are things, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but so that's sort of the immediate
Overall.
president. How have things been going in Bella Vista just over the last year, since you've been in your position? You feel like things are,
Yeah.
going well, adequately staffed?
yes.
All right, not cut you off there. I think you were maybe pivoting to Sherwood or other places, but
Okay, and then with Sherwood, we're staffed well with full-time colleagues. They also could use another part-time or two. Technically, they may be they're at roster guidelines. However, with the competitor across the street being closed on the weekends, and we have difficulty with availability with technicians being able to work on the weekends. We have staff on the weekends, but we could potentially have more, just looking for folks that have that availability to be able to do that. In the meantime, with both of those stores, as well as any of my other stores that may be struggling, I have my scheduler, and I also have I have two district leaders in training. One of those oversees the relief pharmacist, or he's their direct supervisor. And so, for example, well, I'm in this hearing and not able to mitigate it myself. We'll watch their cues. We're in communication with the pharmacists themselves. And if they're reporting that the queues are backed up, or we're receiving those reports that the queues are backed up, then I'm shifting some district support help to them, whether that be pharmacists primarily, but I do have one district support technician who helps with that too.
and does a store have to meet a certain number of metrics before you will allocate that additional support if you think it's needed?
No, I mean, technically, if somebody's struggling more, then that's who needs the help. So that's where it's gonna go.
Is Bella Vista in particular a difficult market to hire techs in? Have you found that in your experience?
Yes, Bella Vista, as you all know, is primarily a retirement community. And what I've discovered in the last year is that folks driving from Fayetteville or Rogers even to Bella Vista, I have a little bit better time with Rogers to Bella Vista, but Fayetteville, Springdale, I have a difficult time getting those colleagues to drive to Bella Vista to assist. I'm not saying it never happens, but it is difficult. In Bella Vista itself, we've both the pharmacy manager and the store manager have expressed to me that they've had difficulty getting quality technicians to apply for the position. And so they've struggled with that, and we've tried to mitigate it as best possible.
You feel like your stores are adequately staffed?
Yes, I do now.
And there was a comment, and I think it was just an observation or opinion, but about CVS blocking calls from the Board of Pharmacy. Are you aware of CVS or any stores at CVS intentionally blocking or screening calls from the Board of Pharmacy?
No, I know that John has called me myself over that several years ago, maybe 2 years ago or so, you think, and mentioned that to me, and I've passed that along. I didn't realize that it's still going on. I don't know that.
That's something you'd be interested in getting to the bottom of if it's still a problem?
For sure.
I don't have any further questions for Dr. Ellis.
Ms. Mills?
So Dr. Ellis, go back. What are the two stores that you are under your purview now?
Bella Vista, which is 10408, and Sherwood, which is 10430.
And so you've basically been fully in that position since March of 23. Is that fair?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And if you heard the testimony of Dr. Fain, or you've read the order of notice of hearing with regard to the Bella Vista store, you're aware that the Bella Vista pharmacist told Dr. Fain that staffing was an issue.
I object to the characterization of the exhibits. There's nothing in the inspection report where it says staffing is an issue.
Ms. Mills, response?
I was referring to the order notice of hearing specifically.
And that's a different question.
That's
I
a
don't
different
have an
question.
objection to
Okay.
that, but
Okay, please proceed.
Are you aware that, the Bella Vista pharmacist told Dr. Fain that, their staffing was an issue that contributed to the errors?
I renew my objection. I think she can answer, but the inspection report and the testimony, there was nothing saying in that inspection report or anywhere else that I've seen where a pharmacist told Dr. Fain that staffing was causing errors. I objected as mischaracterizing the testimony.
It
And
may
the
be-
exhibits.
Frankly, Mr. Mitchell, it may even be outside the scope of your direct, to be honest with you. Ms. Vales, is there some way that
I'll
you can?
withdraw the question.
Okay,
Let me ask you it this way. So you just testified that you felt like the Bella Vista store was fully staffed and you said the word now. At some point, did you feel like it wasn't fully staffed?
I was just talking about overall. I said my stores, were they fully staffed when I took the position on at the beginning of the year? We were struggling. We had quite a few staff pharmacist openings. So March of 2023, I guess January was whenever March 2023 that we were definitely still had staffing openings. We had some turnover at the end of 2022.
And is turnover an ongoing problem at any of those stores that you oversee? Or specifically the ones that issue today?
At Sherwood, both lead technicians have been there for over 8 years. They were there and trained me whenever I was a floater myself.
In the Bella Vista store?
I don't know. I don't think so. Not this year for sure. So I can't speak for sure what was going on in 2020. But
You said earlier that it was hard for you to get technicians to travel to the Bella Vista store.
from my other stores,
And so what would cause you to pull technicians from other stores to work the Bella Vista store?
both the pharmacy manager and the staff pharmacist had babies this year. And so, as you know, we try very hard to make sure that the relief pharmacists are the best quality pharmacists, but as everyone here knows, that sometimes that's just not the same as somebody that's worked in that store day in and day out. And so anytime that we've needed extra support there, then we've reached out to other stores. I mean, I'm not saying that they've never had a technician opening there. That's definitely not the case. But as far as just constant turnover in either of my stores, that's not the case either.
So what's the tech ratio at either of the stores here in question that you supervise?
I mean, in the state of Arkansas, it's 3-1.
I'm asking about those specific stores, that Sherwood store and the Bella Vista store. How many technicians work with each pharmacist? 'Cause you're correct, the ratio is 3-1. Is that your standard at your stores?
I mean, I don't know. It changes based on the demand and, I mean, I have been in both of those stores where there were 3 technicians and during my visits, typically that's the case, but,
What's the breakdown of the hours between the pharmacists and the technicians between the 2 stores?
I'm not sure.
Do you agree with the ratio that it should be 3-1?
No, I'm going to object. This is way outside of the scope of any direct examination. We didn't talk about tech ratios at all. I also object to the relevance, frankly, on the law is that it's 3-1, and somebody's subjective opinion on that is frankly irrelevant to the charges that have been made against CVS.
I would say that she's opened the door when she discussed staffing issues. Staff in the pharmacy is not solely a pharmacist. It's the technicians as well.
I mean, we're kind of skirting around the issue. I'm going to go ahead and overrule the objection, Mr. Mitchell, because I think we're dancing around it. She may have an opinion, she may not. I don't know what the answer is. Can you answer that question, ma'am? You know what the question is? Do you agree with the 1-to-3 ratio?
I mean, not necessarily because I do have Missouri stores. Missouri doesn't have a ratio at all. And I don't see I have not had any concerns with that.
Okay, let me switch gears a little bit. You talked about the baskets and the pictures that were depicted, yesterday. Is it a fair statement to say those represent work that the pharmacist has to complete?
Yes, ma'am.
And there's a time frame for that?
Yes, I think that that's the case for any pharmacy, correct?
So would you characterize that as a backlog in the workflow? It's gotten to a certain point, the technicians, and now it's kind of bubbled up before it gets to the pharmacist that can complete the process?
Yeah, that's not the proper workflow. I'm, testified earlier to what I would think that their thought process was and why they may have completed it that way. But yeah, it's not typical that you should have the amount of baskets.
So when you see those pictures, does that raise a red flag to you as a manager that something in the process is not working?
Yes, ma'am. It shows me that their workflow or training possibly could be off as well. I mean, we've heard that could be various reasons, but yes, it does.
With that, and so what would your response be if you walked in that store? I mean, Dr. Fain's response was like, oh my gosh, let me take a picture of this.
Object to the characterization of Dr. Fain's response. I think first part of the question I didn't have an objection to, but
That one I'm going to go ahead and sustain.
What would be your response when you see that? What would you do about that situation with the backlog and the baskets?
The backlog at Texarkana.
Either one, if you walked in either Sherwood or I think we had baskets from Bella Vista, a picture of those, and we had some baskets from Texarkana.
I mean, I agree that we would need to, there's various things there. Obviously, the first thing that needs to happen is that work that's there needs to be caught up. But there also needs to be some training as far as our proper workflow and following the right procedures and being the most efficient that we can be with that workflow.
Have you reviewed the transcripts that CVS has prepared of the informal conference?
No, I have not.
So let me ask you another question. These, in that informal conference, Rowe testified and talked about metrics. Can you identify for the record, because I think the board had a lot of questions, the board members had a lot of questions about what these metrics were, and I'm not sure we got all that through Rowe. Can you identify some of the metrics that the CVS pharmacists have to complete?
I'm not sure what in particular he was referring to. I mean, I think that we all have we have measures in every pharmacy, but I'm not sure.
What are the measures that your pharmacist has to meet?
That they have to meet, like we measure a lot of things, but are you asking me what they have to meet with some sort of disciplinary action or
No,
just?
asking, so Dr. Smith identified metrics that she had to do at the day shift. Some of those were MTM phone calls, certain amount of vaccines. That's the kind of thing I'm looking for. What are those currently with CVS pharmacies?
I mean, yes, we have patient care calls or MTM calls. We do have goals on the prescriptions as to when they should be due based on if they come in acute, if the technician puts them in us for a certain time. Like I talked to earlier, ready fills are due later. The OPI is something that we measure that lets us know if you know, if we're meeting regulatory standards, if we're meeting inventory standards. I mean, I think that these are things that everybody measures.
Are there, so those tasks, like, let's say the MTM phone calls, those are required of the pharmacists that work in CVS stores, correct?
I mean, I have stores that do not make the calls and I have stores that do make the calls. We do expect you to make the calls, but as far as a requirement and some sort of backlash or punishment, no.
Do they drop in a queue?
So you have the verification queue, you have a production queue. They do come up and say a number of calls that you have to make. They're not necessarily, it's one line and it's not necessarily like disrupting your view of the rest of your work that's due. It drops into the queue, you select that line and it takes you to a different portal to make the phone calls.
So if I'm working in a CVS pharmacy, I can pull up this empty, I'm assuming, do you have different computer screens that you can look at as if you're working on the counter?
There's one computer, you could alternate between two screens.
Great. So I can pull up the MTM queue and also do visual verification at the same time?
I would not recommend that. That wouldn't, I guess that would be possible, but no, that's not.
But you heard Dr. Smith testify that she did that often?
Object to the characterization of her testimony.
What's
I
in
think
it?
it speaks for itself. It's in the record.
It's in the record.
Yeah, and I disagree that that's what she said.
And would you be so kind as to speak up a little bit too as well?
Yeah, sorry.
You're getting softer as we continue to go on. I'm sorry, did I overlook an objection? Or,
Yes, I objected to the characterization of Dr. Smith's testimony.
Ms. Vales?
Her testimony is in the record. It speaks for itself. She did testify that she would do the MTM calls at the same time and looking at the visual verification. So I'm just asking Dr. Ellis if she's observed that in her supervisory duties.
And I would not object to the question of have you observed somebody doing this at the same time? I do object to the characterization testimony. I don't think that's accurate. She was an overnight pharmacist. They're not making these calls.
She did testify that she'd made calls. She worked the day shift and during that time she made the calls. That's in the record.
I think you semi-agree on what you're supposed to be asking.
I'm confused.
Okay. Ms. Vales, could you go ahead and restate the question?
In your observation, and I think you've already answered this, it's not recommended, but are you aware that pharmacists have the ability to do the MTM calls and verify visually prescriptions at the same time with the screens?
With two different screens.
Yes.
Yes, you could alternate between different screens and choose to do.
Okay, let's go over some of these programs you have, the We Care and the My Team Care, and are those programs to be interactive with pharmacists in charge or management?
Yes.
Do regular pharmacists working shifts, what is their involvement in these programs?
Yeah. So with the We Care, we do have a assignment board that pops up and rotates the staff typically every 2 hours. I mean, the time will change. The pharmacy manager goes into our scheduling system and assigns proficiencies to the technicians so that our system then knows during our busier time, someone who has more proficiency, say at production, they need to be assigned at production, while someone who's not quite as proficient at production yet would need to be assigned there during a slower time. So it is important that you keep those, that you have those updated and change them. But once they do that, that's going to assign all of the staff, pharmacists included, on their primary responsibilities and secondary responsibilities.
And what about the OPI? What involvement is that just a management tool for your pharmacist in charge? Or what involvement do the regular pharmacists working shifts have?
No, that's a measure of just overall, how are we, I mean, it takes everybody in the pharmacy to, complete cycle counts and to do orders. Typically, your pharmacy manager is not your person completing all the cycle counts, but they are, they do see that measure and, it comes out every month and that lets them know, like their top 5 priorities. If they're not checked, if, maybe see the control prescriptions haven't been checked in one day, then it, or multiple days, whatever, then it's going to come up as an opportunity. They're not necessarily dinged on that, but it shows that their top 5 most important opportunities that they need to focus on and huddle with their team to correct. And so in that manner, then everybody in the pharmacy would be involved in that.
Okay, what, have any of the stores in your area, or are you aware of any CVS stores that have closed due to lack of sufficient staff at times?
Yes.
And what stores are you aware of that have had to close?
And you're saying just, like at a day or not closed permanently, correct?
Well, there's pharmacy hours are supposed to be, there are hours that the pharmacies are supposed to be open, correct?
Yes.
Regular business hours that are told to the board during their application process. This CVS store is going to be a 24-hour store, for example.
Well, we changed our hours permanently in March and with several stores.
And was that due to staffing issues?
No, that was nationwide as a manner to reduce these type of shifts so that you're not, to be able to reduce their overall salaried hours and how many hours that they work a week, but also how many they work in one day.
Okay. Well, have any of the stores been closed solely for the reason that you cannot find enough staff to work? That you're aware of?
Like at this time, ever?
Within your experience from CVS?
We have had some pharmacist staffing in, probably.
Okay. So, and you worked in Conway store, correct?
Yeah.
Conway store, either Target or Oak Street ever closed because you did not have enough staff to work?
Well, not when I was there.
Well, okay, great. But during your tenure with CVS, were you ever aware of that store particularly closing because of not enough staff?
Yes.
How many times do you think that happened?
I don't know. When I stepped away from CVS in 2022, then that during those few months, which was that store, I don't know how many times that occurred. I'm not sure. And then pretty quickly in 2023, by March for sure, that there was a pharmacy manager and staff in place that were regularly working it. They're there now and doing very well.
Do you have any stores that you oversee that have pharmacists that work alone?
Like without technician help?
Alone, yes.
If they're ever alone, it's due to technician call outs or from something from that extent, but not intentionally.
No, I intentionally or not, there are times when a pharmacist in those stores
Yes.
are working alone. And what would your response be? And this is an allegation in the order notice of hearing. to pharmacy technicians completing pseudoephedrine transactions without the pharmacist involvement.
That, I mean, that shouldn't be happening. The pharmacist is supposed to be, the pharmacist should be consulting, with the patient, before selling Sudafed.
Right, but what, as a supervisor, if you see that going on, what would your response be?
I mean, I've not had that, feedback yet, but that's something that definitely that we would coach in that moment with with the pharmacist on duty and the technicians. I mean, if that was occurring, I'm assuming that was a misunderstanding from the,
Well, you're aware that that's one of the allegations in the order notice of hearing.
I did hear that yesterday, yes.
Okay. And that's all I have. Pass the witness.
Yeah,
Mr. Mitchell?
thank you. Dr. Ellis, I just want to clarify a few things in a few terms. So maybe to give a little background, I know we've talked about staffing, but I want to break that down a little bit more into what is allocated in terms of hours or positions in a store, and then whether or not the workforce and there's an ability to, to actually fill that position, to, have someone there. So in Bella Vista, you were talking about, staffing challenges, I think. Was that because CVS didn't allow another technician to be there? Or was that because CVS wasn't able, at least at that time or currently, to quickly fill that position?
It was just to quickly fill the position.
And Miss Bales, correctly that time, she asked you about closing pharmacies. So, if a pharmacy has to close for some reason or a pharmacist has to walk alone, in your experience at CVS and at other pharmacies, let's start with a technician. If there's supposed to be a technician there showing up at 8 a.m. and they don't show up, is it possible that the pharmacist may have to, may be alone at that time?
Yes.
Is that something that the store or the manager planned to occur or wanted to occur?
No.
And let's say that you have a pharmacy and the stores at issue here were during COVID, and we all know, COVID protocols. If the pharmacy staff all had COVID, in your opinion, if it was unable to pull in other pharmacists from other places at the drop of a hat, would it be necessary to close the store temporarily until they could come back to work, or other people could be resourced there?
Yes, of course.
What other option would you have?
I guess you don't. Yeah.
No further questions.
Ms. Bales?
Are there times when pharmacists are scheduled to work alone?
Not in my stores. I do know that we do have some of the Target locations, and I'm assuming that's what we're talking about, that are scheduled without help.
And just for the record, when we talk about the ratio between techs and hours and pharmacy hours, what's your understanding of that? So-
Yeah. Object, that's outside the scope of my redirect.
It is, Ms. Vales.
I'll withdraw.
Thank you. Mr. Mitchell?
No, nothing further.
Board members, questions?
Ashley, so do you go into your stores? I know it's not every day, but do you go into your stores weekly, monthly, every one of them? Do you
Yes, ma'am.
visit them?
Yes, ma'am. We are on a 6-week rotation where I have store visits with every store at least every 6 weeks. I do have, of course, you have stores that are higher priority than others from different opportunities. And then I'm gonna be in more often than others.
But when you're going in, you're looking at the operation, trying to determine if anything is good or bad or wrong or all the above. I'm just wondering, so we've talked a lot about for several days about knowing about staffing, for example. When you go into a store, do you look at many items that are happening, many things that are happening before you even can determine if there's an issue or staffing issue or problem, or maybe it's their ability?
Yes, ma'am.
So it's like a whole gamut of things that you have to look at quickly to assess the situation.
Yes.
Okay.
Do you have productivity monitoring that you do for each store?
I guess in a way we have carryover, which lets me know if we have stores that have left prescriptions in queue from the day before that like I discussed, I primarily use as a way to know where we need to be shifting resources.
Well, I'm asking, like, do you have a way to measure workload productivity? Usually it's typically something like number of prescriptions filled versus number of hours worked. And there's some target that you don't do any productivity monitoring in your stores.
No, sir.
So if you had a store that filled 250 prescriptions a day and you had one that was filling 1,000 a day, I don't know if you've got that. I'm just posing a scenario. How would you determine the number of pharmacists that you would need and when you would need them and the number of technicians that you would need and what their schedules would look like? CVS doesn't have any type of productivity for workload in place to assess that?
Okay, I don't see any type of report that says, and that's what I understood at first. Of course, our scheduling system is very sophisticated in that it measures both a year from the week and 5 weeks before. And so it takes in the demand from it looks at a year ago and the projected demand, but also looks at 5 weeks prior to see if there's some adjustments that need to be made.
Okay.
In addition to that, I mean, that's still like, we do have all of these metrics. Those are our goals. But that's not to say that if on this carryover report, for example, if I see somebody needs more resources because they're getting an influx of transfers right now, for example, I'm going to have to send the resources there to make it work. That's just what makes sense from a management standpoint. I think that's kind of common sense.
Okay. And maybe I'll get to ask this to another
Go ahead.
witness this afternoon, but it sounds like there may be something along those lines that's running in the background because it's telling you how to schedule based on past performance and recent 5-week trends, it sounds like.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's true.
Dr. Kress?
Thank you. Just wondering, what is the difference between Target CVS and CVS as far as district manager's role? You're on a district manager, so are you over Target CVS's or are you just over CVS?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't get to explain this very well earlier, but so our district leader roles are for my role, for example, I'm over only the pharmacies in those 24 stores. There is a completely different district leader for the front store side. My counterpart he's also a pharmacist. And then my Target partners have primarily only Target pharmacies.
So there's a delineation of power. Right now, you're a district manager for CVS stores that are pharmacies of CVS stores in the state that are not in Target.
Excluding Texarkana, yes.
So how long have you been with CVS? Just CVS?
I graduated in 2016, so that was about the same time as the acquisition from Target.
But you're at Target CVS then. Now you're at just CVS, right?
Well, I went to probably, gosh, it wasn't very long into that. Let's see. Let me think. Okay, I graduated in 2016. I was licensed in June. I don't know, let's say the start of 2017, like January 2017, but
And you were in Target CVS then?
no, I would have switched to core. So I switched it to it as a floating, a relief position for a few months before I was in a staff position I know it was April of 2017 that I was in a full-on staff position at the core. That's what we refer to the standalones as core in Conway. Where I was the staff pharmacist there at that time.
Then you went to Target.
No, I was in Target as an intern and a new grad for a few months.
I got you. So you've been with CVS Core ever since.
Yes, sir.
All right. And then in your stores currently, what is your pharmacist to tech ratio?
I don't know that I'm understanding how to answer that because it is going to be maybe back to kind of what Brian was or Dr. Jolly was talking about, but it is kind of based on the demand.
But I mean, like, not what are you wanting? What is it?
I don't know how to answer that.
And then, okay, so as a district manager, what is your responsibility? What are your metrics and where do you receive those?
I receive monthly reports just as the pharmacists do on a monthly scorecard. That kind of lets me know where I
Stuff
feel.
from corporate.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so if you had to guess, how many metrics do you have that you like that are standard? You know, they're there. I've got to make sure that I've got this checklist. I've got 5 metrics. How many do you think the pharmacists have? The staff pharmacists?
I say we're all held to the same standard.
So your 5 is their 5
Yes, sir.
and they don't have anything extra.
Not anything outside of, no, I'm
You
measured.
do
on how-
MTM, you do all that.
That's part of the measurement. Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
I'm not performing the MTMs. I have gone into
Sure.
stores and helped with them, but it's not no, it's not something that I'm completing on a regular basis.
So you don't have to have so many MTMs completed, but your pharmacists in your stores do.
Yeah.
Okay.
My
What
job
about
is,
the last thing, as far as you know, tell me about the staple sack rule.
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Yeah, where
Oh,
you're
the
not,
Staples. Oh, okay. I thought that was some kind of regulation or law or something. I was like, oh, gosh.
sorry,
Um,
context.
uh,
It's 1954. No, I mean, it's no, just a regular.
I'm not sure where that's coming from. I heard her say that the technician couldn't do it. I don't know if maybe at some point, I mean, I'm just speculating. I don't know if maybe at some point the pharmacist said, hey, like the technician's not allowed to do it because I don't know.
So do the stores have rules or metrics that they adhere to in addition to the things that you tell them to do?
Well, you have the pharmacy manager, the PIC. I mean, if they have, ultimately it's their store. It's their community.
That's right.
And if they have different things that they put in
So
place.
it's fair to say they have more metrics than you do that they have to meet.
I mean, I guess they have different things. It's possible. Yeah. They have
Now
different
they
things.
have the same and then they have some different. So if you add those two together, you've got more.
Okay.
Thank you.
Dr. Question. Oh, Dr. Jolly. I'm not certain who's going to go first. Dr. Richmond.
No, if you go ahead. No, I don't have. Oh, okay. Just a few questions.
Okay.
Help me understand. I guess my perception of a district manager in a chain drugstore, historically, I have observed that it's under their responsibility for staffing, number of hours the store is allowed to have in terms of tech hours or pharmacist hours. And that they would know how many pharmacists and how many technicians would be working. Ms. Vales asked a question
regarding staffing hours, characterizing it for techs and pharmacists. Dr. Jolly asked about it from a productivity standpoint. And then it seemed Dr. Kraus was asking in terms of the actual tech to pharmacist ratio. So help me understand, because in both cases, you generally say, well, I'm not sure. I don't know how to answer that question.
Okay.
Both regarding hours as well as actual tech to pharmacist ratio. Can you help me understand why you can't answer those questions?
Well, there's not a, like I heard earlier, they say, for example, that you at 2,500, like there was a magic number, like at 2,500, you get overlap. That's not true. I don't, if there is it's a algorithm well beyond me.
Okay.
And so those do, their schedules drop. It gives them the demand. And they make the schedule based on that. Now, if there are outlying situations, for example, right now, there are some, an increase in transfers and because there are some competitors closing. So that wasn't. I'm sorry. It's the nerves. So,
One fine.
so what I'm trying to say is that we do have the guidelines sent from corporate. And I can't speak exactly to what those are in each store. I mean, I could look up and see what it was this week, for example, or something if that's, but it does vary based on their projections. But for example, right now, there are some stores that are budgeted because corporate didn't take into account that, you know, these unforeseen circumstances were going to occur. You know, we are working together the council and I are working together to make sure that these are, you know, corrected with our workforce management, but they are going over the budget because that's what they need right now. So that's what's occurring at both at Bella Vista and Sherwood over the last few months. There have been overlap there, even though they may not have the overlap hours. If that's what I have available and I can send it there, I'm going to send it to where they need it.
Right. So I can appreciate the answer that the algorithm regarding staffing hours and how that works out, that's handled, but it's handled by somebody other than you.
Yes, sir.
Whether or not you say you can have 3 techs or you can have 2 or whatever, you can observe.
Yeah.
And as you go into the store.
Mm-hmm.
So do you observe generally a 3-to-1 or do you generally observe a 2-to-1?
In both of those stores, we've had 3-to-1 and we've had to have conversations about what is a cashier as well to make sure that they're not having the third, outside of the ratio. So generally there's at least 3 people there.
3 techs or
3 technicians, 3 technicians and 1 pharmacist. Now, Bella Vista very often has, over the last few weeks for sure, has had overlap pharmacists as well. So it's common for them to have 2 pharmacists.
Okay. As you were talking about Smart DUR and WeCare and OPI, as I'll call it,
That's not the term.
shortly after you introduced OPI, you talked about a measure for staffing and a measuring of staffing adherence, I think was a phrase that you used. Is that OPI or is that some other measure?
That is called My Team Care, but My Team Care is integrated into OPI.
Okay. So does there someone enter that data or is that just simply part of
It's
the timesheet or like, I assume people clock in their hours on the computer. So
yeah.
is it derived from that? How does the data for staffing adherence measurement get populated?
For the adherence piece, it is what the technician has clocked in within a 10-minute or 15-minute time frame. How close? So if I've clocked in at 9 a.m. instead of 8 a.m., then it's going to show that I'm not being adherent, or if I don't come, at all.
So the adherence, is this something that the individuals gets reported back to them, or is this a measurement tool for you as a leader?
It is for the pharmacy team. So for the pharmacy manager, sees that.
Okay. So
I see it
for
too.
lack of, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was gonna say I see it too, obviously, but they do see it. And if we go over that, that's in front of the entire team.
So for subject potentially to confidentiality and whatnot, theoretically, a OPI staffing adherence report could be ran that would show over time what the staffing adherence had been?
Yeah.
Okay, so that potentially could be something that, again, pursuant to a confidentiality agreement that the board could see.
Mhm.
Okay.
Make sure to say yes, just for the. court
I'm sorry, yes.
Mr. Mitchell?
Now, have you worked as a pharmacist in any of the three stores that we've been to, Bella Vista, Texarkana, and Sherwood?
I worked in Sherwood, as that's where I trained in,
Okay.
Like I said, 2016,
Like
17.
7 years ago.
Yeah,
Okay.
but not during this time frame.
And so, and it's been established that you're the district leader over Bellevue and Sherwood. So that would mainly be your contemporary knowledge. Would
Of
it
this year,
also
yeah.
be but you didn't become a district leader until earlier this year, right?
Of 2023,
Okay,
yes.
but other than that, you were primarily at the Conway store.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you haven't worked in Texarkana?
No.
And you're not a district leader over Texarkana?
Correct.
So you don't have any basis on which you could confirm or rebut Dr. Smith's testimony?
No, just outside of what our policies are and what should technically be occurring.
Okay. Now, I think council actually characterized it, so I don't want to put words in your mouth,
Okay.
but I'm just want to clarify. We were talking about the baskets and the pictures, and council characterized it as this is a systemic thing, so it would be within your purview that you could comment on it.
Okay.
I just want to clarify, and again, it was his word, so maybe you can or you can't. Was that meant to imply that this is how we use these baskets system-wide, or that the stacking up of baskets was a systemic problem?
It was just meant to show that this is how, what, like the intention was, not necessarily anything outside of that.
Okay. Now, you commented that the black baskets are auto refill, so is that like for patients who like would be on like a MedSync program, that they're just auto, every time they come due that they automatically get filled? That's what the black ones are?
Yes,
Okay.
if they've
So I
considered to.
also saw in the pictures blue baskets and yellow baskets. So what do each of those mean?
So yellow baskets are, people that are in the store or waiters. You know, oftentimes if somebody calls and says, I'm coming, then you'll expedite it and put it in a yellow basket to differentiate. Blue baskets, are not, that has gone away. That used to be a refrigerated item or acute medications that not necessarily deemed waiters, but something that was more urgent, like they would be coming.
And I'm sure you don't have these pictures emblazoned in your mind, but it just, as I noticed in the Bella Vista pictures, there were all three colors, but in the Sherwood store, it was pretty much mostly just the black baskets. But in Texarkana, they were all three colors and all stacked up, and those are the ones that were on the floor. So does that tell you anything if you're seeing baskets stacked that way and of all colors and all stacked on the floor, which just seems a little odd to me?
Yeah, it looks like, what I've seen so far is not what our intended workflow is supposed to be. And that's what I spent a lot of time in 2022, working on, was just overall in these stores, helping, get back to that.
And you said you have 4 Missouri stores?
9.
9 Missouri stores.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
In September of this past year in Missouri, and I think in Kansas, there was a CVS walkout. And my understanding that was primarily over staffing and quota issues.
I didn't have any of
Okay,
those.
well,
So,
that was really my follow-up question is, were any of your stores
no, sir.
affected by that? But is my characterization, my understanding correct that the CVS pharmacists walk out that they were mainly griping over staffing and quotas?
That's not my understanding of what led to it.
You share with me what you, you share me what you think that was about.
I don't know.
So it's not about staffing, but you're not sure what it was about.
I don't have those stores. I mean, I've read the same things that you have.
That's fair.
No
That's
one, my stores are close to that area. They're Springfield, Missouri, and I had no one that was involved in that.
So I guess really my follow-up question to that was what you said that there were some nationwide changes that were made to staffing. I forget the context in which you said it, but I made a note of it, that there were nationwide staffing changes that were made. My question is, were these nationwide staffing changes made in response to the CVS walkout?
No, the ones that I'm referring to are, I remember they were week 12. So I think that was March 2 of 2023, where we had hour changes nationwide.
So the nationwide staffing changes that you were referring to in your testimony really occurred well before the walkout.
Yes, sir.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Dr. Kraus?
Are you working, do you have a store that's just yours right now?
No.
All right, so you just kind of play rover, go where you need to go?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Dr. Jolly?
One follow-up question to what I was asking about earlier in terms of workload monitoring. You alluded to are you given a certain number of hours to work with, like across your district?
No, it's store specific.
Store specific. And is it differentiated between pharmacist hours versus technician hours?
Yes.
Okay. And you said that some of that is based on like 5-week run rates, like previous 5 weeks, or a year over year look back to the previous year.
Yeah.
Are you aware of whether those indicators are financial in nature or workload volume in nature?
No, it's not. It, from my understanding, it is a workload based, and it includes the medications that were completed, phone calls coming in, and then you can also measure the amount of drive-through that occurs.
Okay, so to the best of your knowledge, revenue or profit for the pharmacy or the store, including the out front area, just revenue in general, does not play a factor in driving those allocated hours?
No, I mean, that's going to affect your revenue in any pharmacy, but that's not in the in the measurement.
Thank you.
Dr. Mack?
So we're really going down the same question line, but I think we're having a hard time seeing that a district manager doesn't actually know, I guess, their payroll percent, maybe you call it that, but so I guess my concern would be, and you kind of mentioned this, I understand the sophisticated system and they put it in, they send it down. Then does that tell Debbie what to do, Leanne what to do? I mean, what time I'm going to work, or does the manager tweak that somewhat?
So a demand drops into our system. It also creates a curve based on the time of day and how many technicians per time of day. So, typically you would need more help in the morning to get that workload out. And then maybe in the evening, maybe you had 3 technicians during the day, but you had 2 in the evening. And I think that's one reason I'm having a hard time answering it, because it's not always 3, it's not always 2. You may have and so, and I'm not trying to make it more complicated, but so that drops down, or your pharmacy manager creates the schedule.
So they literally go put people in spots, or
Like they put in there like the technician's time,
that they need a technician from 8 to 5 and they need a technician from 12 to 9, or Or does the schedule do it for y'all? I guess that's my question.
The schedule does it for us, but the pharmacist can edit it.
Okay. And then surely at that level, they have X amount of money they can spend on payroll, I would think. Now, I'm asking you, but surely they would have a limit. They can't just go get 10 pharmacists a day if they wanted, or 20 techs if they wanted.
Okay.
So that they have a budget.
Yes.
Okay, and then you evidently, it sounds like you have a little bit more of a budget in case somebody's having problems, and you're kind of tweaking the schedule as they have opportunities, but
I'm not tweaking their schedule. So if
you're
they,
sending people in if they're having an emergency or a problem or a.
yes, that, or they're creating the schedule if they, have, if we, for example, there's a couple of stores that I know proactively right now, we've got to have some more help in there. And so we're scheduling that, and then we're working on the back end with corporate to get the information to them to make, so that they can understand that we've got to adjust that demand.
So the pharmacy manager has X amount of ability, and then you can kind of come in once you know what's going on in a store and help them if need be and get it to corporate so it does work out, or, and I
Yes.
don't mean physically go help them, send them help.
Yes.
Okay, well, so that might be why you can't say exactly. I mean, the old days, it was very clear because you had a schedule and people just knew how many texts they had, but it's a little more difficult with this
Yes.
schedule that's supposed to help you.
Yes. And with every store being so different and having so many complexities that it is hard. That's why it's hard to explain.
Dr. Davenport?
I have a couple questions. So you mentioned a lot of training that was implemented, which I think was in reference to sort of actions taken because of the incidents that have been in discussion. Were the pharmacies given extra hours for that training, or was it added on to the workload and then just another metric? Was it online training? I think we've all done, like, I think one time I clicked through training for a forklift, and I assure you, you don't want me to run a forklift for you. So was that like one-on-one training? What was the requirement, and was it a metric that was then measured and graded, or was it like implemented and showing results?
As far as the testimony from Roe, I'm not sure what,
I just thought I thought you mentioned several different like training pieces that were in place for.
the training pieces that I was in 2022.
Maybe I didn't write down the years.
Okay. And we for We Care relaunch, yes, we brought in myself and I had 3 technicians on my team with me that we went into.
So it wasn't added on to their workload while they were supposed to be responsible for patient care at the same time.
We spent a week in each store, and it was me and, like I said, me and 3 techs, regardless of the volume of the store.
And then you mentioned that you stepped away from CVS in 2022. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. So I did step away in 2022. It was my direct leader. There was a whole lot that went into that. I went to Walmart for like 2 or 3 months, and I worked as a staff pharmacist with them. I'm not sure how much you want me to elaborate on that, but council called me.
He's like busting at the seams to talk.
Whenever you get to him, like, y'all better save him for after. He's a mess. He's funny. But I'm sorry. So yes, I left. I had a major council called me back.
So what changed to come back other than council smiling and telling you things that you?
Council changed. There were a couple of things. So
Okay.
one, council changed.
Okay.
He came into the he was not my leader
Okay.
before.
Okay.
Okay.
So there's been significant leadership change in
Significant.
this whole time period that we're discussing. Is
Yes,
that what I'm hearing?
so, the company changed in as the leaders were only, where we only have pharmacy leaders, like, so now we only have pharmacy. We're not before you were worried about the whole store. Now, the district leader has only the pharmacy, the region leader has only pharmacy, and they have to be pharmacists. Okay, so that was a major change. And that helps. You can imagine why. Okay. So, council also is just very known for being about the people and caring for what's happening, more so in the store. He's been with CVS for a long time and he had a known reputation. So for that. So he was not technically my leader at the time, of my separation, but I did include him in my, resignation letter. And so once they resolved the issue, with the leader that was in place, council, did his research on me and then called me and offered me this position. So.
And I think my last question is, so we talked a lot about employee retention being an issue. And I know that that's been a discussion across the board for a lot of places, but it seems to be more of an issue for CVS. Would you agree with that?
I don't know. I can't agree with that or necessarily disagree either.
My question ultimately would be, do you think that the difficulty and turnover and all of that is reflective of workload issues or training or anything that falls within really the employer's responsibility?
I think it's time period specific. I think that there are there have been definitely training. I think also your leader, regardless of where you work, makes a huge difference. Because like we discussed some of these things with budgets and that sort of thing and how I approach that, for example, and how the pharmacy manager approaches that. I mean,
do you feel like company culture supports employee retention?
Yes. Yes. On that.
Now more than 2022 or before?
I'm sorry.
Would you say now more than 2022 or before?
It's hard for me to say from it's hard to say for sure about what was going on in 2020. But I would say I'd say it's more of an emphasis in 2023 forward.
Thank you so much.
Richmond.
I'm not a nosy person, so I don't want to or need to know what prompted your leaving in 2022, but I am going to ask you this directly. Did your leaving relate in any way directly to staffing?
I was allocated an overlap pharmacist at my store. This is not the primary reason for me leaving. It was a factor. I was allocated one. I could see it on my schedule. My leader would not even open a rec for me to try, even if I would, because the pharmacy manager wouldn't typically be the person hiring the pharmacist. But even if I was offering to recruit the pharmacist myself, that wasn't a possibility.
Okay, thank you for your candor. Was it related to workload? So not just staffing number of hours, but was it related to workload in any way?
No.
Quotas in any way?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the board? If not, follow up from council, Mr. Mitchell.
Nothing from me. Thank you, sir.
Ms. Vales?
I just have one question to follow up on Board Member Davenport's questions as far as your duties. What are your duties? Are there duties for you if you have one of your stores that's failed the board inspection?
Yeah.
What would those be? What would you do if you had a pharmacy that you supervised fail their inspection?
I've not had one flat out fail. I have had one that had to have some documents printed and that sort of thing. I followed up with the pharmacy manager to make sure that they had those completed. And then I actually went in myself and helped them to file prescriptions and just work on on out of dates and that sort of thing. So the time that I took management, like I discussed before, we had some things that weren't you know, the leader before wasn't, bringing the same level of detail to, so,
Well,
I'm-
let me direct you a little bit. It's under CVS exhibits 38. Is that right? And it's labeled failed inspection, April 2023.
That's labeled.
this one.
In the list on the tablet, that's what it's identified as. It's not gonna be that way on the paper.
I have the inspection report from April 2023, that one.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
That's CVS exhibits 38.
You can look at it.
Yeah, it's a Sherwood store.
This is the one I was referring to, so.
Yeah. So, but you'd agree with me, if you look at that document, that Sherwood store lost their Class A pharmacy designation. Is that correct? You see that on the bottom of the form?
According to this, it was my understanding that they came back a week later and re-inspected, and we were,
Was it a week or was it 2 weeks?
my recollection was a week, but if you have that it was 2 weeks, it was 2 weeks.
Okay. And so that would be a failed inspection, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And this was April of 2023.
Okay.
And you were in this, although
Yes.
relatively new,
Yes.
but in this position at the time the Sherwood store failed their inspection to this failed inspection by that Sherwood store.
So I went to the store with and actually the DL, I had a DL that was helping me during my training process. And he had brought his district support tech with him as well.
For the
and
record, what's DL?
district leader.
Okay.
And so I went to this store, we went to it together and helped to file the hard copies. Help the pharmacy manager find where to print her DEA license from. It was up to date, but the correct license wasn't posted. So we helped correct those errors.
So this store, would you say needed help?
Yes, ma'am.
And you provided that based on what was found by the Board of Pharmacy in this inspection?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that's all I have.
Mr. Mitchell?
I do have some follow-up now. All right, so on this same tab, the, Dr. Ellis, I think the inspection report that, Ms. Bales just mentioned, it was April 2023. And then if you go to the very next one, I see an inspection report from May 11th, 2023. So a week or two later, what was the outcome of this?
They were successful Class A pharmacy, previous deficiencies corrected.
And were you reading from the remarks there? It says previous deficiencies corrected.
That's right.
And for the errors that were identified 2 weeks before, I think you testified what your response was, but a lot of papers that needed to be posted or updated.
Yeah, there were things that needed to be updated
And let's look April 7th, 2022. So it's a page prior. I know this was before your time, but this Sherwood store was inspected in April 2022. Can you tell by looking at this inspection report, were there any problems identified?
no,
Class A pharmacy,
correct.
that's it.
Ms. Reynolds?
All right, if you look at that exhibit, you were in that Sherwood store and the inspection report lists the staffing at the time of inspection. Do you see that in the middle of the first page?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And what do you see there with regard to the staffing?
2 pharmacists, 1 technician, and 1 clerk.
And then look at the one from April 7th of 22. See that?
1 pharmacist and 3 technicians.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Mitchell?
Nothing further.
Quite a bit from council. Board, do you have any follow-up based on the line from council? If not, ma'am, thank you very, very much for your testimony. I'm not going to ask if she can be excused because I know she's going to stick around regardless. I assume they're being fed again today, Director, is that right? So, Board, how much time do you need for lunch?
1:30. 45 minutes.
45 minutes, all right. It
Okay,
is,
is that enough time for you guys to?
That's fine.
Okay.
it's 12:45, so we will reconvene at 1:30. We are off the record.